Welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. It is Thursday, February 15th, 2018, and the time is 5:22 p.m. Can we please have roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Craignotti?
Here.
Commissioner Doom is temporarily absent. Will be here in 5 minutes. Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, second item on the agenda is the reporting of posting of the agenda. This was posted on or before Monday, February 12th on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Number 3 is the approval of the minutes from January 18th, 2018. Are there any comments or corrections?
None.
No.
None.
To approve the minutes?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Craignotti?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Madam Chair Shire?
Yes.
Minutes are approved 4-0.
Okay. Number 4, oral communications. This is discussion limited to items not part of this agenda. The speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. For oral communications, we have 1 speaker card. Catherine Yurka.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm just here to announce a workshop that the Glendale Historical Society is sponsoring on Wednesday, February 21st at 7 p.m. at the Brand Library and Arts Center. It's called Historic Districts in Glendale, What They Are and How to Create Them, or as I like to call it, What They Are and Why You Want One. And they're going to be people who've been involved in the historic district process either in the past or currently, talking about the various aspects of creating a historic district, what the benefits are, and how residents can do it. Thank you.
Wait, can you give us the date again?
Oh,
The
yes,
date and
sorry.
time?
Wednesday, February 21st. So next Wednesday,
What time?
7 p.m. Oh, you guys are grilling me.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, with no other speaker cards, we'll move to number 5, comments from commissioners.
I have a
You have some?
bunch.
Go ahead.
I have a bunch right at the moment. First, representing the Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley, their meeting is on Monday, February 19th at 7 p.m. at the La Crescenta Center for Spiritual Living, which is at the corner of Dunsmore and Santa Carlotta. And the program that night is called Beside the Los Angeles River. The guest speaker is Mark Roselle, author of a recently published book, Beside the LA River. Mark's family purchased a 114-acre farm in 1886 along the Los Angeles River between present-day Compton and Downey. Basically, he's going to talk about what happened over the years. At the meeting, Mark will show some of the never-before-seen family photos of this area in Catalina Island. He'll recount some of the fascinating stories from his book. They, at one time, had dug the deepest artisan well in Los Angeles history to that date and became successful and affluent. They faced the fury of the Los Angeles River, the Depression, and the Long Beach earthquake. And that, again, is on Monday, February 19th at 7 p.m. I have one more. As you all know, coming up is the 105th anniversary of the founding of Montrose, which was on February 22nd, 1913. So at the farmers market up in Montrose on the 25th, the Historical Society will have a booth celebrating that anniversary with books, the Glendale Montrose Railway Trolley Bell, and all of some videos and other stuff just for that day. And last but not least, I got this email the other day, and I just want to kind of read it and ask a couple questions. And I'm sure it's gone around, but I'm not sure if everybody in the city knows that. We are sorry to report that the rare and relative intact 1908 Craftsman House at 1420 Valley View Road was recently demolished without a permit from the city. The house is one of the oldest in that part of the city and exhibited exemplary elements of craftsman design. In 2016, the owner applied for a demolition permit, but was turned down because the historic preservation planner for the city determined the house was potentially a historic resource and that an environmental impact report was required prior to the issuance of a demolition permit. The owner appealed to the City Council in November 2016. Council unanimously upheld this staff decision. Council determined that there was substantial evidence that the house was a historic resource and told the owner that a focused EIR was required where the house could be demolished. Following that, we understand the city staff attempted to work with the owner to break him into compliance, and they thought the owner was cooperating. Then, last week, the house was unexpectedly demolished. We believe the property's owner's demolition of this house was both willful and a egregious. The demolition was done without a permit, and it was done in contravention to the California Environmental Quality Act. And it was done despite the fact that City Council had determined that an EAR must be prepared before the property could be demolished. Anyway, I would like I'm familiar with the house and what they had done prior to the demolition, but I didn't realize that they had actually done it till I got this email, and
Neither did we.
I'm very upset, to say the least. And when we're coming to the South Glendale Community Plan and the 5 S3s and the 6 Ls, this rings heavily on my mind as to what is what. So if you could fill us in on anything that you might know or can tell us, I'd appreciate
We
it.
don't know details of exactly what happened. Obviously, it was demolished. We can't really say that we know much more than that. The city attorney's already taken action. We are already working internally to develop both a response to this demolition and to look into how we can prevent or at least adequately punish future demolitions. City Council has requested a report that's going to be presented on March 13th. So any commissioner or member of the public who's concerned about this, which I think everyone in this room probably is, can come to that hearing, listen to hear where the city attorney has been able to take this, what staff will be proposing. We haven't fully developed anything yet since this is so fresh, and then we can certainly give an update at the next HPC hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just really quickly, as this meeting will show, we are about to be going into a very complex and heavy discussion about some things going on in South Glendale, and I know that the Glendale Historical Society has been tirelessly working, as well as led by their own Catherine Yurka, and I just wanted to commend them on their efforts. They've been doing a great job and have been working very hard, and the city of Glendale is lucky to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here, here.
Any other comments? Okay, item 6, old business, and having none, we'll move to item 7, new business. 7A1, this is a presentation by planning staff on the South Glendale Community Plan and the draft environmental impact report.
Okay, before I turn this over to Laura and Eric, who are going to make the presentation on this subject, just in terms of the format, this is a much more complicated agenda than we usually have. I've mentioned to you at last month's hearing and probably a few times previous that this is the opportunity for the Commission to focus on the South Glendale Community Plan, particularly the section that focuses on historic resources, and then also look at the draft environmental impact report for the community plan, which also focuses on historic resources. So your comments are going to be taken down and not recorded. They will be recorded on GTV6. Hopefully that will work perfectly, so try to speak very clearly into the microphones. Everything you say we need to capture. I'll be taking notes. These are advisory hearings to the ultimate decision-making body, which will be the Planning Commission and City Council. I think Laura or Eric will explain that process and schedule for you all. But the really important thing is for all of these, we're taking comments from both commissioners and the public. All of the comments are going to be presented in written form in the response to the draft DIR. And we're also here to answer questions, and there may actually be more questions than comments, I don't know. So with that, we'll just let, who's going first?
I'll go first.
Okay, our principal planner, Laura Stotler, will start off, and let me get her presentation going.
Jay, would you advance? Oh, perfect.
Chair Shire and members of the Historic Preservation Commission, my name is Laura Stotler. I'm a principal planner with the city, and we've been working on the South Glendale Community Plan for a number of years. What really started off the plan was a grant that we received. We started looking at the Tropico neighborhood. So as part of the overview tonight, I kind of want to give you an overview of what the purpose of the South Glendale Community Plan is. I know we've been working on it for years, but it seems new to everybody else, so please interrupt me if you don't understand what I'm saying. We've been so immersed in it, sometimes it's hard to put ourselves in the shoes of people who aren't used to this. But what I want to point out is the South Glendale Community Plan is a series of policies. It's a programmatic document in the terms of when you take a look at it, we will be talking about the policies that we would be adopting and programs that would be implemented in the future. So while it might look like we're changing a lot of things all at once, realize that this is a long-range document. It's a general plan level document. So we'll go over that. I'm also going to give, or we will also give an overview of the draft environmental impact report and the alternatives. Then we'll go through some of the implementation programs also that are as part of this program. And again, it's a long-range plan. And then we'll focus on issues which are germane to your commission. We have a historic resources discussion. That's in the community plan, chapter 3.12. And also the cultural resources section in the draft DIR, that would be section 4.4. But again, you're welcome to comment on any section that's in the community plan or any section that's in the environmental document. And then your comments would be forwarded to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is the agency that makes a recommendation to the City Council concerning general plan level documents, which these are. So what is a community plan? Community plan is part of our general plan. State law requires us to have a general plan. And community plans are aimed at taking general plan level policies and how do you focus that in on the communities within a certain area in the city. In this case, we're looking at South Glendale. Community plan guides neighborhood and commercial district development policies, not only now, but for this plan, out into 2040. It looks at changing and sustainable land use patterns for the future. We're looking at community character. That's something different right now. We have a land use element that does not address what do we want individual communities to look like. This is why we're focusing on the communities in a community plan. And if you take a look at the plan, you'll see the majority of that document is spent on Chapter 4. What Chapter 4 is an overview of each individual community in South Glendale, and then a series of policies of what we want to see happen in that community for the future. We will see also in the community plan a recognition of the past projects. As you're well aware, with any land use you have anywhere, what has gone before impacts what you're going to do today and what will happen in the future. So you'll see we have an old chapter of past plans that have occurred in South Glendale. A lot of people said, oh, there haven't been a lot of planning efforts. Well, we have over 30 planning efforts that have been in South Glendale. They just haven't been coordinated. So one of the purposes of a community plan is to coordinate all these past efforts, recognize that they've occurred, and they've shaped the landscape that's there now. Then we also have citywide policies and regional initiatives that we have to address in a community plan. I would point out two main ones are greenhouse gas reduction and sustainability policies. That's to be consistent with a lot of our state and federal laws that have come down since we've adopted our land use element. So when we talk about South Glendale Community Plan, we're talking about mainly the area south of the 134 freeway, but we also including the area that's encompassed by the downtown specific plan, and that does go in a small area north to Glen Oaks. And this is the South Glendale Community Plan project. This is our land use map that we're focusing on what we'd like to see in the future. I know it's small to see here. I would refer you to the document to take a look. Specifically, you'd want to look at Appendix D, I believe, is the map. And that defines the different land uses. If you also take a look at the South Glendale Community Plan, perhaps the easiest way to review this or to read it is to take a look at the table of contents, because the table of contents identifies the different types of land uses and how they are implemented or would be implemented in the future. And then the land use map kind of puts it all together of, okay, we have our individual communities, how does it look on a holistic viewpoint? And I realize this is larger, looking at a number of square miles when you look at this map, but that's how it's organized. So when I talk about a policy document, not only are we coordinating past efforts, we also have some more recent efforts. We had a Metro grant that we were given to do the Tropico study, and one of the appendices that we have in the community plan is that Tropico study. And what the Tropico study really does is it says, how are we going to implement walkable neighborhoods? How are we going to get people to ride transit? How are we going to make our existing Metrolink station, our existing transit station, more effective in serving our public? So one of the efforts we have as part of the project is not only do we have the Tropico study, which we did, we want to incorporate those policies throughout South Glendale. Eventually, we'd like to incorporate those walkability policies throughout the city. As part of that, we're focusing on transit-oriented development. We want to have a new transit-oriented development area designated and then new zoning identified for that area that's right around our transit station. And I have a slide about that in a little bit, but it's basically to serve our Glendale Hospital, which is down there, and also a lot of our transit-dependent population, which goes through that area on a daily basis. We also have a safe and healthy streets plan the city's worked on. We have a draft pedestrian plan, 2016 citywide land use data that we've updated to do the EIR for this project. Prior to that, our most recent land use data citywide was from 1990, so it was a tremendous effort to update all the land use data in the city. We've also updated our city transportation model, again, another effort that was quite important, because now we have a model that can look at multimodal data. It's not just about driving in cars. We have expanded capacity. You'll see that in the EIR as well. More policies. Again, it's neighborhood focused. We have an outdated general plan, so we're focusing on what do we want to see in neighborhoods. Eventually, we'll use this data. We have a North Glendale community plan. We'll have a South Glendale community plan, which we're working in now. The next ones will be an east and a west, and once we have the entire city covered, it'll be easier for us then to update our land use element of the general plan. We anticipate that may happen as soon as sometime next year. We're looking at transit-oriented development policies. We also have an affordable housing overlay. That's something that has been urged by the state. When you have high-quality transit, which we're looking at putting in the city, then we want to have an area, then walkable distance, in our case, 1 block, on either side of those roadways that would have a high-quality transit, where we would want to have increased transit densities or densities in excess of 35 dwelling units per acre along that side. Again, that would not only put people in proximity to transit, but then we're hoping when you have enough people who will living along a transit line, the transit line itself will be more successful. We also, as part of this project, we also have a downtown specific plan boundary changes for 21 properties. One of the directions that were given from the city council was to make sure that if we have properties that have split zones where you might have part of it in the DSP and part of it in another zone, include all those properties in the same planning area so we don't have confusion over what type of land use we want to see in the future. So that's included with this. And then we also have a small C3 zone change almost across the street from where we are here, actually, on the north side of Wilson between Jackson and Isabel. There's a small area that's zone C3-3 that lets you have 90 feet of height. So we're proposing to take the height district down. It would still be C3. It would be down to C3-1, which would be 50 feet. That reflects the height of the buildings that are already there. And then we, as part of that, we actually have 1 lot in there that is developed right now with an apartment building. So we'd be taking that zone down to R1250, which is what it's built at now. And again, the programs would be implemented over a number of years. So when we get to the, yes.
For the properties, like the 21 that are being, for the split zone properties? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
For the split zone properties, this is just a high level question. Are most of them being pulled into the change to DSP?
Yes.
Okay.
We are proposing to have them be brought into the DSP.
Okay, thank you.
And here's the project that really started it all, the Tropico Center. You can see in the picture there's a purple star, and that purple star is our transit center. So this is really the heart of the area that we were looking at in terms of where we want to have our first expansion of transit service, and we want to adopt those policies to make sure that we have transit-oriented development. Most of the area, a lot of the area right now is zoned for SFMU. That's our highest density mixed use. We already have it zoned that way. As part of what we're proposing, we wouldn't necessarily be changing much of what the zoning is in terms of capacity, but we would be looking at adding things like ensuring there's walkability and changing some of the perhaps the street characteristics to make sure you have wider sidewalks, have more landscaping, changing lights to make it more friendly to have people cross the street safely. Those are the types of changes. You'll see those policies throughout the community plan.
The transit center, you're talking about Larry's Arian Transit Center?
Yes,
The SP station?
right.
Okay.
And then other policy documents that, or policy initiatives that would be part of the Tropico Center, and again, we would spread those throughout the city, would be maintain neighborhood character, walkable streets, economic development opportunities. We're looking at pedestrian safety, promoting infill housing. When we're looking at development, looking at bike lanes and hubs, expansive transit service, a lot of last mile, first mile issues. How do you get people in existing neighborhoods to bus stops safely? Streetscape enhancement, transit adjacent housing. And then we're also looking at integrating open space, multimodal streets, multiple activity centers, multiple transit centers. So it's not all just about Metrolink, it's not all just about bus, it's about coordinating the two.
Can, when you say integrate open space, is there much open space in South Glendale?
A lot of it in terms of, the answer is there is some, but we have neighborhoods that are park poor throughout the city. So a lot of it is how do we get people to get to the open space? How do we make some of our walkways more inviting so that would be a recreational opportunity to get people out? Open space isn't just a park. I mean, we're looking at it in terms of how do we make our streets more open and inviting and give recreational opportunities there. So when we look at bikes, they can be transportation, they can also be recreation. So we're trying to take a holistic view of it. When we look at things like safe routes to school, part of safe routes to school is making sure that there's a safe place for people to walk, so kids to walk, so they're not always driven to school. They have an opportunity to walk should they want to. So it's kind of a broad base. Also, integrated open space has to do with some of the larger developments that we're seeing going in for mixed use. There's some incentives where perhaps we want to have incentives to have people put in plazas and things so people can congregate not only in public spaces but also in private spaces as well.
Thank you.
And then we also have Space 134. This would be in all the alternatives we studied in the EIR. We'll get into that in a little bit, but this is a project that we've been looking at. We have a study right now to look for the feasibility of Space 134. So the document itself, how is it organized?
Could you go over Space 134 for those that might not know? Or is that coming later?
Oh, no. It's basically it's what's called a cap park, where you build a podium over the freeway and you put a park on top of that. It would connect the north side of the freeway with the south side of the freeway, provide a lot of amenities. It's a major undertaking, so what we're doing right now is the feasibility study to present to council to see if it's something they're even interested in pursuing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I believe it runs between Glendale Avenue and Central.
Right.
Right.
For Geneva and Central.
Okay. The community plan itself is quite extensive. The goal behind it was to keep each neighborhood kind of light, not have a lot of text, more policy and more directives to look for other documents. So it's more of a coordinating document if you take a look at it in terms of how are we adopting principles citywide. That would be Chapter 3. And we had a long-range plan that was done back in 2006 with the city. It was a huge community effort. People came out from all over. I believe there were over almost 20 meetings that we had on that. And as part of that, the public identified 12 issue areas where they wanted to see city action. We took those policy areas and we said, okay, what do we want to see citywide? And you'll see those. We identified those as principles. But what Chapter 3 does is take those citywide principles and say, how do we want those principles applied in this community? So for the South Glendale Community Plan, when you take a look at Chapter 3, you'll see citywide and then a discussion of, okay, what does that mean for South Glendale? So I would point your attention to Chapter 3.12, and that's a historic resources section. I mean, I know many of you are familiar with what we did in North Glendale. It's similar. And then I would also point you to Chapter 4, because Chapter 4 is the heart of the document. I mentioned it before. That's where we have our neighborhoods. We have our organization. the way this community plan differs from other ones in the past is we're focusing, because this is a transportation-based plan, because that's how most people experience communities. You experience communities where you live, by the place, and how do you get there and how do you move around. So we have our neighborhoods are based, because that's where we live. So you'll see your neighborhoods as your residential areas. Then we have centers. Centers, if you think of like Montrose, where there's a center where you have a walkable area, you can walk around, you park once, walk around, think of it as destinations. Then we have corridors, that's our street corridor when you're driving somewhere. So you'll see when we talk about the different land uses, we've divided it into what do you want to see on corridors, how do we want those to develop, because those have different characteristics than what you would want to see in a center. So that's why they're different. And when you look at the descriptions in the community plan, you'll see that those differences are identified, and a lot of those have to do with urban design, and that's really where urban design featured into this plan. And unfortunately, our urban designer left us, but at least Alan did. But I want to point out that you'll see some wonderful work done in this document, and that was put together by Chris Agardi. A lot of work, a lot of the design guidelines of what we want to see in the future. That's all Chris's work. She was the architect of actually putting this document together, so I definitely want to acknowledge her. That was a lot of work. And places is really the heart of it. And then we also have Appendix A1 and Appendix A2. That's the historic context and a historic resources survey, which I know you're familiar with. And then next, I want to go into what are the immediate actions that we would be asking for when this when we take this to council and ask for adoption. And we would be asking for the city council to certify the final environmental impact report. Right now you're at the draft environmental impact report. Eric will go over the differences between a draft and a final. But we will also be asking for South Glendale Community Plan adoption. That would be adopting this policy document and the programs that are attached to it. If you want to take a look at Chapter 6 in the community plan, it actually lists implementation. That's what we want to see adopted eventually. And again, this is a plan out to 2040. It wouldn't happen at once. But the immediate action, certify the EIR, adopt the South Glendale Community Plan. We have a land use element and a circulation element amendment that go with this. These are not full-blown amendments. These are just amendments, basically the bare minimum that we need to change to acknowledge that we now have a community plan and that we now have land uses in the community plan that include urban centers. We're including a single-family hillside designation, which we do not have now. We're including urban centers. There's a lot in here. I'd have to go through and read it to you. But they're all in here. That's the purpose of a land use element, a circulation element. We also have the downtown-specific plan amendment. Again, that's a boundary shift. It's not changing the community plan in terms of any text. It's just the mapping. And again, we would be there's 21 parcels that we would be including into the community plan. And then the converse is if we're putting them in the community plan, we're also taking them out of the citywide zoning. And then we also have that small zone change that we're looking at on Wilson.
Question, Laura?
Yeah.
Sorry. So is there a potential for different land uses to come up when you do the east and west community plans, and then would the element be amended again?
Yes.
Okay.
There's very likely that we would have different uses. I would think our hillside zone, definitely we're going to look at something different, because in South Glendale, we only have Adams Hill, which is essentially an R1 neighborhood. We don't have the residential open space zone or designation in this area. So we're not looking at amending that. We're only looking at amending we don't have a nexus to amend that at this point. If we do an east and west plan, we definitely have a nexus to take a look at that. I don't know if you're aware, but when they adopted our hillside ordinance, and that was back in the 90s, they did not amend the general plan. So a lot of those policies that we've been implementing, we just want to ensure that while they're in the zoning code, we want to ensure that they're also in our general plan. And so if you take a look at our hillside, it's a single-family hillside, and it's included in the South Glendale Community Plan. You'll have a new description for that land use. Right now, it would just be on Adams Hill, but should council adopt this, and then we work on the future plans, we will definitely be looking at implementing that designation elsewhere. And then we also have other implementation programs. Again, these wouldn't happen immediately, but we're looking at having these within probably the next year. Transit-oriented land development zone, that would be TOD. That's our that's making the zone changes to implement the walkable neighborhoods down there by the train station. Part of the reason this would be the first action is we were given a grant to do the EIR, and the grant was for transit-oriented development. We also have new mobility and land use elements that we would be looking at holistically in the future. So we understand that's already been budgeted for next year. So that would be a major effort we would be undertaking. We also have a small lot subdivision ordinance people are interested in. We have small lot design guidelines that would be adopted in tandem with that. We have new mixed-use zones along our corridors that we're looking. You'll see in the community plan where we talk about mixed-use zone or mixed-use 1, 2, and 3. That zoning has not been identified yet, so we have the parameters of it. It's identified in the EIR, but we have not actually developed that zone yet. And then we have other future implementation, and again, that's all outlined in Chapter 6. So next, I'd like to turn it over to our I forgot what your title is today. You're not interim. You are the deputy director, Eric.
Thanks, Laura. So good evening, members of the commission. So in terms of the draft EIR, essentially we started, council had asked to weigh in on what the alternatives and the project would be for the South Glendale's community plan. So in July and August of 2016, we actually went to and did 3 separate study sessions for the city council to weigh in on what alternatives they wanted to see in the environmental impact report and kind of flesh out what the actual project itself would be. And so as part of that, we went through and did several community meetings back in fall of 2016 and explained to everyone what the different alternatives we were going to be looking at and what was going to be in the plan and some of the different changes we could expect in South Glendale. So we did hold a EIR scoping meeting in the fall of 2016. Oh, thanks. Where was it? Okay. Yeah, so we hold that scoping meeting, just typical like scoping meetings. Not a lot of people come out to those because they don't really understand what it's for. But it's to take comments on what should be included in the EIR and what different, and it's really set up for agencies, outside agencies that might want us to look at additional impacts that they might need to use that EIR then for some of their approvals like Metro and that sort of thing. So the draft EIR was finally released quite a bit later, so January 11th, 2018. So it's been out for about 30 days now. It's out for a 60-day public review period currently. In the EIR, you look at different resource areas. So you're looking at air quality, aesthetics, cultural resources, traffic, 16 of the biological resources, just a whole bunch of them. So the EIR looked at 16 different environmental resource areas, and cultural resources among those. And that cultural resource section was 4.4 in the EIR. So there's a complete analysis of the specific plan and any implications that that specific plan might have on historical resources, archaeological resources, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, paleontological resources, human remains if any are discovered during any kind of construction. And then also the newest thing that came a couple of years back was tribal cultural resources, which is also included in that section. Okay, so in terms of the project, essentially the project that was evaluated in EIR looked at approximately 10,336 dwelling units over the period of the development plan. So that was kind of like the project that we looked at, and then we also looked at 3 separate alternatives in the EIR. One of them is the no project alternative, which is a requirement of CEQA. Anytime you're doing an EIR, you have to look at the no project, assuming normal growth throughout the life of the plan and what would happen impact-wise for that. We looked at the downtown Tropico Center plan as an alternative, and essentially, let's see here. If you looked at that one, that would include about 5,400 to 7,400 dwelling units, and so that would maintain kind of some of the Tropico TOD would be included in that. A lot of the downtown and the Brand Boulevard corridor, and so we're looking at areas that these are the different neighborhoods in the plan. So that would have included Adams Square and then a GCC campus area, Columbus School, Pacific Gateway, East Colorado, the Pacific's Edison Center, South Glendale Avenue, Verdugo Road. So those were all included as part of the alternative 2, which was the Tropico Center plan. And then alternative 3, which is actually, typically on an EIR, when you look at alternatives, they're numbered by the amount of density. But this one, alternative 3, actually provides more density than alternative 2. So it's, you can't look at it as a sequential drop in numbers. So alternative 3 was the East Broadway South Central Avenue development, and that included about 7,400 to 9,400 dwelling units. And this would add a new mixed-use zone that Laura was talking about, the MX zones, and also introduce an affordable housing overlay zone along some of our corridors that would be along Broadway, Central, and kind of Brand in that area. And then also some rezoning along East Broadway should the Metro, because there's right now Metro is looking at putting a bus rapid transit line through Glendale. We're not sure about the alignment yet of that, but that's, if that BRT, as its term, would come into play, then that area would be upzoned to allow for more density along that transit corridor. And then also some basic rezoning in the West Broadway area. Excuse me. So whenever you do an alternatives analysis in EIR, you have to look at what's the environmentally superior alternative. In this case, it would be the no project, which is pretty similar to most EIRs. So if it is a new project, then you have to pick a different alternative that's not the no project. In this case, the alternative 2 was determined to be the environmentally superior alternative to the project, which means it would reduce impacts to some extent. Now, none of these alternatives really significantly reduce impacts, but they do reduce them by the reduction in the amount of development that will be anticipated over the life of the plant. So that's where the primary reduction comes from. But the most of the resource areas, the impact would be pretty similar on each of the different alternatives. And so Section 4.4 of the draft EIR looked at cultural resources, and as indicated before, looked at historic, archaeological, and paleontological, human remains, tribal. So there's different thresholds that we would look at. I'm pretty much just going to focus on the cultural resource section. If you guys had other questions about it, if you had a chance to look at it, then I'll be happy to answer those. Right now we're just focusing on this section of the EIR. So I'm going to read portions of these thresholds for significance. So essentially, the first threshold we look at is whether or not the project will cause an adverse change in the significance of a historic resource. And in doing that, we looked at the resource survey that was prepared as part of the EIR and kind of tried to determine which resources do we already have in the downtown. So any impacts to those were looked at. And then also what resources did we find that might be potentially eligible as ones that we need to take a closer look at. So there's actually a few mitigation measures that have been added to the EIR, and that's mitigation 4.4-1 and 4.4-2 that specifically deal with historic resources, and that's on page 4.4-22 of the EIR. So essentially, anytime we have new development coming in, because essentially the EIR is looking at a program level, so there's no real development that's occurring as part of the EIR. It just allows for development to occur once you have our change in zone and stuff like that. What would happen if those zone changes came into play and the realm of the amount of impact we anticipate over the life of the plan. So the resource areas that were looked at and the thresholds that we looked at didn't find any significant unavoidable impacts as a result of the plan, but any future development could have that potential. So there's mitigation in here to address any future development on those sites. And if you guys have questions about that, I can try to clear it up a little bit. So in terms of the historical resources, we had 2 different mitigation measures on. There's a total of 8 mitigation measures that were included in the EIR to address all the different resource areas. Archaeological resources also is found less than significant with mitigation, and there's 4.4-3 and 4.4-4 address potential archaeological impacts, and that essentially requires that you have someone on site that's monitoring the sites as demolition or excavations occurring. You'd have individual that's like an archaeologist on site at the time when they're doing that sort of work, so they can discover any kind of potential archaeological resources. With paleontological resources, similar to archaeological, you'd have an on-site monitor. Mitigation measures 4.4-5, 4.4-6 would addresses the impacts of paleontological. And then we have 2 mitigation measures related to human remains, which If remains are found, then we need to determine whether or not those are of local significance for our local tribe. And then you have to go through a series of processes with county coroners and all sorts of stuff to try to determine who the resources, the remains belong to, and then try to deal with them that way. And mitigations 4.4-2, 4.4-3, 4, and 8 apply to the tribal cultural resources. And that requires on-site monitoring as well. So the different resource areas that were looked at were all found under the plan to be less than significant, with these mitigation measures being applied to future development. Okay, so I pretty much went over the fact that they're less than significant, went over the mitigation measures. Yeah, I'm getting there. I did have in here, I'll try to figure that doesn't really match here. So other different resource areas that the ER did look at. Bear with me here a second. So in terms of significant unavoidable impacts, there were some identified in the EIR, and those were dealt with aesthetics, mostly for shade shadow impacts, view corridors, that sort of thing. Air quality impacts are found potentially significant, unavoidable, mostly during construction phases of projects, and similar for greenhouse gas emissions. Population housing, some of the numbers that we're proposing in the plan are greater than what we're currently obligated to provide under our housing arena numbers, so it exceeds SCAG projections. And then public services, which is police, fire, those sorts of things. There's recreation impacts, because adding that many people, and if you don't provide enough resources for recreation, that causes a significant unavoidable impact. And then traffic and transportation, there's some intersections that were unmitigatable. So in terms of kind of next steps, the comment period ends for the draft ER on March 12th. 2018, and the close of the time would be 5:30, so we'd like to get all of the written comments in by that time so we can address them as part of the final EIR. In the final EIR, basically, you need to respond to any comments you get during the public phase and provide those in writing as part of the final. Any changes to the EIR that come up as a result of some of those comments, provided that they don't result in new impacts, gets kind of folded into that as well. So we are having a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and Traffic and Transportation Commission to take comments on the entire EIR from the public, and that's going to be on March 7th, 2018 at 5 p.m. here in the Municipal Services Building. So with that, concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
In the last section, when you were talking about unavoidable impacts, and you discover that there are some, and there are some probably negative impacts, does that not change or put into effect more mitigation measures or anything like that, or it's just that's the end result?
Yeah, so when you have an unavoidable impact, it means there's no feasible mitigation measure to impose or apply to the project that would reduce those to a less than significant level. So in order, for the environmental impact reports are like a public information document for the public and decision makers to determine whether they're willing to approve a project knowing that it has these environmental impacts. So it's essentially when you're doing a significant unavoidable, you're telling the decision makers that yes, we do have impacts that can't be mitigated. If you do adopt this project, that's going to be a result of the potential environmental impacts of that. So they do have to do what's called a statement of overriding considerations and make findings that essentially say that the benefits of the project would outweigh the impacts that the project itself causes. So when it's significant unavoidable, it means there's no mitigation measure that's available to reduce it to less than significant.
And then can you talk a little bit about the zoning area just north of here that's going to be kind of downgraded? And if this is a plan for 2040, and you say it's not going to happen immediately, how are you making sure that developments from now till then are at that lower level of height?
Well, if we talked about that, the C3 zoning is going to be one of those things that we do right away.
Okay.
That one particular area. The other zonings, the plan really anticipates that if we don't get the proper transit to support that additional housing, then we wouldn't actually change some of those zones, those being the mixed-use zones. So that zoning wouldn't occur until we actually have transportation that can support that amount of development. So when that happens, then we would go through the process of doing actual zone change to allow for that.
Okay.
And when council was reviewing this, they basically looked at some alternatives in terms of these various transportation projects that are possibly going to come forward, and directed us to go with the highest intensity one, with the knowledge that, like Eric said, if the streetcar doesn't happen, if the BRT doesn't happen, there'll be less of the intensive development along those corridors.
Are there any questions or comments from commissioners?
Well, as far as, I mean, with the BRT, that's really the only real option. I mean, there are not going to be any rail lines coming into Glendale. I don't see Metro in the next 50 years sending any rail into Glendale.
There's
So-
discussion of a streetcar. What's going on?
They're, they're very echoey. It's even,
Right now, as Jay said, we actually have hired a consultant to look at what it would take to put a streetcar. Essentially, they're gonna look at different alignments and that sort of thing. But right now, what we provided to them was a streetcar that went from the Burbank Hollywood Airport along Glen Oaks down Brand to the Larry's Aaron Transportation Center. So that's one of the
Basically
transit
like
options.
it did prior to 1955.
Exactly.
What's that?
Your dream come true.
Yeah,
Oh.
well, no, you're redoing, when you go down Glen Oaks.
Oh, yeah.
it's-
We're putting
I mean,
it back. Yeah.
Yes, basically.
If so it depends on what so they'll come up with the different alternatives for council to weigh in on. If council decides they want to move forward with one of those options, then we would pursue some grant funding from different sources in order to try to get
But
that streetcar as a
Would it be
reality.
run by Metro or a conglomeration of cities?
That we haven't. Well, that's what we hope to get out of the study is determine
Okay.
how do you run it, how do you pay for it, what are the costs, where's the best place to run it, what are the different train options that you have, because you have overhead, kind of electrified. Now they have electrified in the rails. So all sorts of different options that you can do in terms of that. So that's one of the things that we're pursuing relatively quickly, because we did get a grant from SCAG in order to review the streetcar to see if that's a viable option for us. The BRT I think is a pretty good reality. I think Metro's really pushing it and asking where they can put it in Glendale. So I think where that goes is going to be kind of the deciding factor, whether they run it along the freeway or, there's talks about Broadway or Colorado. So I'm not sure how great those would work. Realistically, it's probably going to go along the 134 in terms of rapid transit. So that's in terms of Metro, they're looking at that and pursuing that pretty heavily. So
As an Eagle Rock resident, I support Colorado.
yeah, I mean, the other talk, light rail, like you said, it's kind of one of those pie in the sky things. When and if we ever get heavy, the high-speed rail, those sorts of things. So, but with the BRT and a streetcar, I think that we can start then looking at which one of these different rezoning options we could then pursue.
Which one? Cost is
I have a question in section, or policy 4.1.3 on page 16. So could you clarify the last sentence there where it talks about, it says the historic resource must meet the Secretary of Interior standards and be placed on the GRHR prior to or concurrent with design approval. And that same sentence applies to, it says 7.2.3 as well.
Did you have a page number?
16, well, 4.4-16.
Oh, you're looking at the EIR.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm in the cultural resources 4.4 section, page 16.
Yeah, 4.4-16.
Policy 4.1.3 and 7.2.3.
Okay.
I'll have to have Laura address the policies.
Okay.
When we're looking at EIRs, we take a look at what policies are going to be implemented as part of the plan that gets kind of folded into the analysis.
So I'm just curious the timing of what does that meaning by that sentence, prior to or concurrent with design approval?
DSP.
Yeah,
DSP section.
downtown specific plan section.
question for Jay, actually.
Well, Jay's going to say what he believes that's referring to is in the DSP, we have an incentive, a historic preservation incentive. And would that be where this?
That would make sense.
Well,
Yeah,
the
that would make
incentive
sense.
is
Okay,
in
that's
policy
probably big.
4.2.2, the next one, which I have a question about next, but.
Yeah, those are both incentives in the DSP in exchange for taking advantage of an incentive, which could be an open space incentive, we have a hotel incentive, and then we also have a historic preservation incentive, and then this existing building incentive. The idea would be that you would be finding a historic resource, and I'm not sure how many that we have that this would apply to. Say it had a large parking lot on the back of it, and you could develop that parking lot and preserve the resource within the context of that project. The building would be nominated for designation and hopefully designated, and then the project would get more area, more density for development in exchange for this. It's kind of the trade-off. And the same applies to existing buildings, the idea being even if it's not a historic existing building, in many ways it's a good thing to keep the granularity and the feel of the street intact, and if a developer chose to pursue that incentive, it's available.
So in that scenario, it would go design review rather than
For
HPC?
the existing building, it would go through design review.
Okay,
For the historic building, it would likely, if it weren't already designated, our current policy would be that it would go to HPC as an advisory review and then be heard by
Okay.
DRB. And it could also happen with designated resources. So, and in which case it would definitely go to HPC for design review.
okay. And then policy 4.2.2, the last sentence there, could you provide clarity? It says the amount of the bonus received shall be in proportion to the amount and the architectural value of the building and the building features which are retained as determined by the review authority. What is amount in the second amount in that sentence? What does that refer to? Seems a bit awkward.
Well, it's the amount of additional height or FAR you would get in exchange for what you're providing to the city in terms of maintaining that historic resource. I can go get a copy of it and then get back to you in terms of the specifics.
That's fine. Maybe just we could add some clarity there, though.
I think it also, just reading it, and I'm not sure, because it's talking about historically significant buildings at the beginning, but then it goes on to just talking about older buildings. The idea would be that you might preserve the front half of a building and perhaps demolish the rear portion so that from the street you would still have the street facade would be intact, a portion of the volume of the building would be intact, but maybe the development would come up behind that. And I don't know that there'll be how we'd figure that out, but I guess the goal of that's to incentivize keeping 100% of the building, because then you get 100% of your incentive. If you keep 50%, maybe
I see.
we'd give 50% of the incentive. That, yeah, that part's not exactly clear.
Thank you.
So when it says reuse of significant architectural features is encouraged, is the facade an architectural feature? Does that mean-
Sometimes, generally.
No, but I mean, is that, features could mean a lot of things. Architectural features could be a lot of things.
Well, generally, with historic buildings, you talk about character-defining features. Non-historic buildings also have architectural features that are defining of their character, even if it's not their historic character. So those would be identified by staff, by consultants. It would be things like entryways, original storefronts, doors, window openings, windows, cladding materials, things like
So
that.
reuse, basically meaning
The
it
idea
stays in situ.
Yeah, the idea would be to retain as many of those
Okay.
as possible.
Got it.
So it's kind of like when we think of a rehabilitation project, whether it's for a historic building or a non-historic building. And we're trying to incentivize keeping things as much as possible if the incentive is enough to convince the owner or the developer to go that way.
Thank you.
Back in the EIR, under the mitigation measures, 4.4-1, it talks about, the first sentence talks about information about the properties that are eligible for listing on the Glendale Historic Resources list shall be publicly available. Is that this front-end portal we're working on, making it easy for people to?
Yes, yeah. So essentially what that means is we're going to make sure that the public and developers and everybody knows that there's a potential resource on that site up front, so it gives them a little bit more clarity on what, if they can or cannot develop that site, that sort of thing. So we are going to be putting all these things into CSI if we haven't done that already.
So like this list of things that
That's
we're
part of
going
it.
for.
I mean, the resource, it'll be available on the website, just to put it out there so for everyone to see, so there's some awareness that we do have some resources that we're interested in maintaining and just getting the word out essentially.
Okay.
In that same paragraph, the last few sentences, so we're on page 22, mitigation measures 4.4, 4.4-1. I wanted just a little bit of clarity on the actual CEQA review. So middle of that paragraph, it states, additionally, any project proposed to demolish or substantially alter a 5S3 property will require separate CEQA review, which is good. Then my confusion comes at the last sentence there where it says, but demolition of 6L properties will be allowed without further environmental review.
Yeah, and to be
Oh,
honest
I'm
with you, I
sorry.
took a look at that this morning when I was preparing things, and I really think that was supposed to be 6Z.
No, it's 6L also.
Is it 6L? Okay.
Yeah.
But
So-
you look at under any 6 under the under CEQA is not a resource under the historic California Environmental Quality Act. So that's why you would see the 6 is designated in that way. So I think the mitigation measure is saying, hey, we're going to look at it and we're going to make sure that we try to incorporate the most features that we can and try to push people in a certain direction to maintain those historic features, but it's not treated as a resource under CEQA.
So when it has that special special consideration in planning,
Yeah, and we've talked about that a few times here, that for properties that are 5 or lower, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, that means it's a historic resource under CEQA. If there's a proposal for demolition or significant alteration, we're going to require further environmental review, initial study leading up to an environmental impact report. Hopefully we'll also work with the people to try to avoid those impacts and try to find a project that won't lead to any issues environmentally. For the 6L properties, this again is just kind of reiterating our current practice. As Eric said, these aren't historic resources, but because the language in the status code says that they're eligible for special consideration in planning, that's where we apply what I'm calling enhanced design review. So it's a kind of a historically oriented design review to try to keep these buildings intact for the length of their lives, but when the time comes and someone proposes a demolition, we're not going to require an EIR.
and then should we include, this just targets the 5S3 properties for CEQA. Should you not say 5 or lower, covering all those other numbers?
Yeah, we can definitely make a change to that. I mean, to me, it's like anything that's potentially eligible needs to have that
Yeah.
review, so it wouldn't necessarily be just
that
a
code.
5S3. And I think
Okay.
if we say it's potentially eligible, then should be able to cover that.
Okay,
Or we can just list them all.
yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
in general,
Be
this
clear.
paragraph needs to be revised to include National Register, California
Yeah.
Register, Glendale Register properties.
Thank you.
Just like that.
Are there any other comments from commissioners?
Not for me.
Okay, with that, we have a speaker card. I'll open the public hearing on this topic. And Catherine Yurka.
Hi, good evening again. I actually just mainly wanted to pose a question about the 6L properties without environmental review. A number of 6Ls have not had any kind of research done into owners, residents who might have been significant in Glendale history. A lot of the city directories were missing for this the survey, and also the original addresses were not walked back by HRG. So it'll say there was no record of this property in the directory. That's because they were looking under the current address and not the one. I think they changed in 1918 or 1919.
Yes,
And I just wanted to know if you are interested in posing this question, since I cannot, what would be done in order to determine whether these are historic resources because of their significance in association with important people or events in Glendale or the state or the nation. Thanks.
Do you
Are
wanna-
you posing it?
Jay, do you want to address that?
Sure. Well, we also have our consultant here. Unfortunately, our lead project manager is not available for us tonight, but and I'm not going to put him on the spot right now because of that. So, but if he's able to address that later, specific to their research, that would be great.
Okay.
Unlike almost any other reconnaissance level survey of this type, in the contract the city entered into with HRG, there was a limited amount of research done on all 6L properties. To the best of HRG's ability, they reviewed all of the important documents, all of the city directories particularly, and did background research on the names that were determined. Also through permit research, you obtain owner names, and you can kind of do your research based on that. In HRG's experience, it is exceedingly rare that you find people of significance living in especially the relatively modest houses that make up the bulk of the survey. So their findings looking through the 6Ls and that they didn't find anything kind of jived with their previous experience on many other surveys, as well as what they've looked at here. So I agree with Catherine Jurka that, you know, yes, there are possibilities. There are things that we aren't going to know, and that's going to be the case with any survey that's ever been conducted. Within the budget that we had for this survey, I think we're getting an amazingly good and solid survey because it takes it beyond the reconnaissance level, which is the windshield survey, and moves toward an intensive level survey, but you know, without doing the full level of research that would take. And I've never seen a city or a large-scale survey like this that was able to go into that much depth. If over time anyone in the community wants to do research and look into this more deeply, the survey is not a dead document the day that it's approved. It's a living document. As we learn that there's significant buildings or significant associations that we weren't familiar with, we can make changes to the document. As buildings are demolished, we can make changes to the document. So, so I'm comfortable that, you know, we have a robust, you know, format that will accept change like that. But at this point, I don't think there's any way we could expect our consultant to go deeper than they already have.
And what would be the process for changing one of
Yes.
those codes when information comes forward?
Depending on the situation, I can picture many situations. A member of the community comes and says, oh, you know, John Wayne spent 10 years in this house and we didn't realize that. Well, to me, that's going to be a very significant connection. We would bring it to the Preservation Commission for discussion, and with your approval, we would probably recommend moving that into the 5 or higher or lower, whatever, category, and then amend the document.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any other comments? Then we'll move on to the agenda. Jay, I'm not sure exactly what number we're on at this point. Are we
where I
on
start floundering
7A2 yet?
Well, we've sort of covered A2. I broke this into 2 sections for kind of each discussion, so that, you know, basically we need your buy-in. What we'd like to have is a vote based on your questions and the answers you've heard and your review of the document, whether you're comfortable with both the South Glendale Community Plan, but I think primarily we're looking at your comfort with the draft EIR. But your recommendation will go to the Planning Commission, as Laura and Eric said, and then the Planning Commission's recommendation goes from there to City Council. So if we, if you have no other questions and we can get a sense of your comfort level for a recommendation, that would be what we do.
On the draft ER section.
Yeah, and then would it be just on the EIR?
Yeah, it's really the draft EIR.
No, okay, just for the draft.
Yeah, with the comments stated that we've already given. I
Right,
think.
we have all of your comments incorporated that will go into the record. We're definitely going to revise mitigation measure 4.41. We will fix, well, I'm not sure that, were any of the others leading to revisions?
Clarifications maybe?
Okay, well, we'll go back through and make,
Okay.
make those recommendations as it goes through the review process.
So you're looking for a motion from us to?
Yes, a motion, if you're inclined to recommend approval or to not.
So moved.
For
To approval.
A2?
For the draft EIR.
draft EIR.
Approval of the draft EIR with the comments that have been stated by commission today.
I'll
So
second.
we'll be recommending the draft approval with clarifications and basically corrections as recommended.
That's the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right,
Roll
roll call. We have Commissioner Vartanian,
Yes.
Commissioner Doom,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Crignati,
Yes.
and Chair Shire.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 5-0, and we'll make sure all of your comments get included in the report.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay, 7A3, presentation by Historic Resources Group and planning staff on the South Glendale Historic Resource Survey.
all right. So again, this is, hold on 1 second. Okay, this is a kind of a two-part presentation. We have our consultant who's pinch hitting, John Locascio, for Historic Resources Group, who will kind of return to give you kind of an overview of the survey findings and answer any questions that you have. And then after you're finished talking with John, I was going to give a presentation focusing on the kind of properties that we've been discussing over the last couple of months, that the Historical Society has made their recommendations. Historic Resources Group has made their final determination, their final recommendation, excuse me. And then we'll acknowledge places where there's agreement between the consultant and the commission, where there's disagreement, and there are also a few places where staff is kind of open to, well, we'll just go there. You'll see what that's like. So I'll introduce John Locascio from HRG.
Thank you, Jay, Commissioner Shire, Chair Shire, I apologize, and Commissioners. My name is John Locascio. I'm a principal at Historic Resources Group. We completed the South Glendale Historic Resources Survey for the EIR. First, as Jay said, let me apologize. My colleague Christine Lazaretto is the principal in charge of this project, and she is out of the country, and so I'm pinch hitting in her stead. So I apologize that you're stuck with me tonight, but I'll do my best to fill Christine's shoes. Jay asked me to come in tonight and give a little bit of an overview, and I will do this very briefly because I think Christine has given you this presentation 3 or 4 times already, so I don't think we need to rehash it in great detail. But Jay asked me to give you a little bit of an overview about our experience with surveys and our methodology in conducting this survey. HRG was founded in 1989. We're the oldest historic preservation consulting firm in the Los Angeles area. We have done, in those nearly 30 years now, all kinds of historic preservation consulting, including planning and surveys. We are it's completed now. We were one of the lead consultants in Survey LA, the City of Los Angeles' historic resources citywide survey. And for the last 10 years, we have been participating in that with the city and with the city's other consultants. As one of the leads, we helped formulate the methodology for Survey LA. And we, in the process of those 10 years, have surveyed not hundreds and not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of properties. Survey LA actually surveyed almost 900,000 properties over the course of those 10 years, and we were a part of quite a few of those. And just incidentally, our firm also has a very long and odd connection, coincidental connection to Glendale. Our founding principal, Christy McAvoy, was born and raised in Glendale. Her family has long ties to the city. 2 of our principals are past presidents of the Glendale Historical Society, and about a quarter of our staff currently live in Glendale. So we are well poised to conduct this work. Our methodology included review of all previous evaluations for properties in South Glendale. Previous surveys were the Glendale Architectural and Historical Survey of 1984, the San Fernando Road Industrial Survey of 95 and 96, the Glendale Downtown Specific Plan Survey of 2006, and the Glendale Craftsman Survey of 2007. We conducted a reconnaissance or windshield survey of the study area to review previous survey findings and to identify additional properties that may be historically significant. We met with city staff throughout the process to discuss methodology and review preliminary findings. And we reviewed property-specific information provided by the Glendale Historical Society, so additional layers of information that were provided for each property. And we conducted additional research on neighborhoods and on individual properties. And that research methodology included review of Sanborn maps, historic building permits, historic aerial photographs, city directories, and ProQuest archives for newspapers, historic newspapers and periodicals. And just in answer to the earlier question, where we could find old addresses for properties that have had their addresses changed, we did do directory research for those, but we could not find, in the limited scope we had, we could not find old addresses for all properties that have had their address changed. And that's it, very briefly. So I will turn it back to Jay unless you have any specific questions for me.
Are you going over this? Thank you.
I misplaced a copy for myself. I don't want to.
We can share.
I printed many.
You did.
Anyone in the public would like to have a copy of what we're going to be discussing? If there aren't enough, please share. Okay, so this horse is still alive. We've hit it a few times, and we'll continue to do so until we until we're done.
Until we have to drop the pencils.
What's that?
Until we have to drop the pencils.
That's right. So what we wanted to do is kind of just go back over some of the properties that have been sort of in if not contention, in play. Discussions between the Historical Society, the Commission, the consultant, and staff. So we have these kind of four players trying to create the best survey possible. And there, as we've talked about before, there have been a few points where I personally and professionally believe that there's a certain direction that should be taken to keep this survey consistent with professional standards, with the standards of every survey that HRG has performed over the years, and those that I'm familiar with. And there are certain things we've looked at and said, yes, that, what are we fighting about? This makes sense. And then there are things that are kind of somewhere in the middle. So I just wanted to go back over. I have slide images that correspond to these groupings. So and we're only talking about, I thought it was 42, but this says 46 at the top. So we're talking about 40-something properties. I'll try to go much quicker than we did the last time we went through this. And the groupings should help. So these are properties where ultimately the Historical Society may have felt differently on many of these, but the Commission at the last round, when we kind of looked at the properties individually, kind of decided to kind of go with the commission, or I'm sorry, with the consultant. Sometimes those were in unanimous votes, sometimes they were in split votes. In a split vote, as in any parliamentary procedure, a 2-2 vote goes to the no side, meaning stick with the consultant rather than change to the Historical Society. And these are the properties that have been determined by the Commission at this point to merit either 6L or 6Z categories. And as you know, it's really hard to say that about cute properties. Cute old craftsman houses look great. These, and forgive me, these slides have all gotten a little distorted, so everything looks kind of taller than it really is, but you can imagine. But the idea being that these properties have either been too altered over time, or that they really didn't have what it takes to go from a 6-level property to a 5 in the estimation of the consultant. This one may hurt when you look at the Quonset hut, but the lovely news is we have another Quonset hut that's completely intact that's being turned into a brewery. So that's, I think, a great reuse of a Quonset hut. And it's visible from the street, whereas this has a kind of a brick box on the front. I know that this property is a source of deep contention, and we have a letter from Francesca Smith that I gave to you. We also received a DPR form, a survey form prepared by Ms. Smith, suggesting that this property is eligible under Criteria 1 and Criteria 3. Criteria 1 for its significance as a business in the community and its role in transportation history. and criterion 3 for its architecture. Our consultant and your staff member here don't agree about the architectural merit of this building as an example of streamlined modern, but we haven't had enough time to review the DPR form to really, I gave it a scan. It came in minutes before the hearing tonight. So we'll definitely be looking at that, and this is one of the kinds of properties that, based on the new information coming in from the community, if we think at staff level that it's clearly, well, regardless of what we think, we'll bring it back to the commission once we have a chance to review it and give it to you for your consideration, but we didn't have time tonight. So as of now, this property stands as a 6L based on the commission's views, but that may change when you read the report, or we may need to get the report beefed up based on my initial review. Oh, this one looks especially funny at the short, squat, and tall, or whatever it is. So, yeah, these are so insignificant. What weird proportions. So this is the grouping. Properties with enclosed porches are particularly, in some cases, heartbreaking situation because obviously some of these houses before the porch was installed were pretty good examples of the style. In general preservation practice, porch enclosures on craftsman properties lead to a loss of historic significance. This isn't just HRG's view, it's not just my professional view, but I've spoken with a number of other consultants over the last month or two, just kind of, testing, just making sure we're all on the same page. Not every consultant is going to agree with that, but it does seem to be a very common issue. And the possibility of these houses being brought back, with the porch being removed in the future, an owner presenting a Glendale Register nomination to us is definitely a possible option. So it's not inconceivable that some of these might ultimately become 5s if the owners chose to make those changes. And did I skip? Yeah, we kind of pulled this together really. Oh, I'm on the wrong page, that's why.
So I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So the HPC has voted 4-1 for it to be a 5S3, but the recommendation from HRG is as a 6L. Is that reflected anywhere or other than this piece of paper? I mean,
well, it's going to be reflected in what we present to Planning Commission and then to Council. So Council will know that the Preservation Commission disagreed with the consultant and with staff. For me, this is a huge issue. When we tell someone that their property is a 5, we are changing their future. We are making things more difficult for them if they ever decide to develop the site. And I believe that if the city is going to use the power to do that, we have to do it when we are truly preserving something that has historical meaning. And I kind of look at this as we're collecting specimens and collecting buildings of different types. If I were Noah, I wouldn't have taken the 3-legged zebra. I would make sure that I had a 4-legged zebra getting on the ark. I'm concerned that, if we're kind of going against standard preservation practice, not just in Los Angeles, but around the country, it's really the wrong way to go, and it completely violates our methodology. And I know it's hard to let go of some of these. We are strongly recommending that we move forward with 6Ls for them. I think in most cases these would be 6Ls. But the Commission's disagreement, and you can discuss this tonight, and we'll see if there's ongoing disagreement or not. But it's one of the rare situations, given how much respect we have for the Commission, where it's like it's kind of the wrong thing to do moving forward. I'm sure we'll hear some dissenting views from the audience, yeah, but we'll have an interesting discussion, hopefully. So that's why in that. And then the following examples are the same. So these are the enclosed porch examples, and these are the properties with siding that's been replaced. And this, again, is also a difficult situation. Again, it's standard practice to not look at these as significant resources because they're missing one of the key character-defining features of the Craftsman style, which is wood siding, which is usually horizontal wood siding or shingle siding. And often these have asbestos siding. What we don't know is, is the original wood underneath the asbestos siding? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's not in good condition once you remove the asbestos siding. So again, these are all examples of properties that could possibly be brought back by an owner and achieve status of historic resource, so, and possible register designation. So this property on Harvard Street we did leave open because the Historical Society presented information about the owner that thinking the owner could be significant. We haven't received enough information, I think, to share with the commission to suggest that he was, and that it would be eligible under criterion 2, even if it's not eligible under the architecture criterion. But, so this is another one that could change if we receive new information, or if the owner took off the siding. So there were a few examples of properties that are not particularly distinctive, and in this case we'll see kind of more variation in the findings from HRG's initial assessment to their final assessment, and also in staff recommendations. So we have one of the key examples that has been discussed in these meetings, the Dunn Edwards building, and you know, this is one where the commission voted 4-1 to make this a 5. The Historical Society fought particularly hard for this building to make it a 5. Our consultant is adamant that this is not a good example of its style. I don't think it's a great example of the style myself, but this is one that I'm kind of on the border, and I'm ready to kind of push the staff view to move this to a 5, which would be in line with the commission's view. Over the HRG decision for a 6. And again, all of these will be noted in the reports that go forward. This is the Armory building. Initially, this was given a 7R, meaning HRG needed to do more research about this. That research was to find out, is this Armory building anything of significance in the history of the National Guard, history of armories? They did not discover anything that made this particularly significant, and then looked at it as a relatively modest and fairly late example of style, and felt that a 6L would be appropriate, because through a 6L we'll be able to preserve the steel windows, we'll be able to preserve the general character of the building, but as we said before, if the National Guard sells the building or proposes major changes, well, if they propose changes, we would be able to protect the building unless they pull rank on us. So that's another issue. But if it were proposed for demolition, we would allow that to go forward. We have 815 East Duran. This is a situation where the consultant was swayed by the arguments of the commission and TJHS and kind of moved this up into the district contributor level, but didn't find it to be at a level of individual significance. So we're comfortable with that right now.
Should that be 5S3?
No, that's what it's.
It's 5D3, which means appears to be a contributor to a
Got it.
potential district, because this is in the East Duran multifamily residential district proposed. We have this dingbat style building. Again, you know, I'm fine if we make this as a 6L, but as we discussed before, the only thing we're protecting through a 6L is the kind of wood siding over on the right side where it says the Isabella. These windows will be replaced at some point in the future, and we talked about you cannot replace these windows with windows that look similar, so regardless of what happens, this building's going to change in appearance. But through 6L, we could keep some control, and HRG maintained their view that this is not a significant building and should be a 6Z. In some ways, because of the issues relating to the future, you know, the main thing that happens to these buildings are window changeouts, and these are all the old original nail-in aluminum windows. So, so that's still kind of could be an open issue, but it's not going to be a 5 certainly. This building was seen as not an excellent example of this kind of minimal traditional with not really streamlined modern, but has some aspects of that style. HRG raised their view to 6L, which was HPC's recommendation also. And for the, I'm sorry, for this Isabella, I guess at the last hearing, the commission voted to make that a 6L. 1223 Everett is started out as a 6L from HRG. The Historical Society saw that it was a 5. We had a 3-1 vote. Staff was whatever, and the HRG is recommending 6L. So that's another one that could be in play. It's a nice house. It doesn't seem to rise much beyond a lot of the other properties that were given a 6L. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to maintain the methodology through the course of not only the survey, but as we implement the survey. And I think that's why TGHS was pretty solid about that being a 6L. They were comparing it to their other properties. We have 2 houses that are next to the Byram House on Everett Street. The Byram House is has already been noted as a 5. It's been identified in previous surveys. It's one of the most important historic properties in the city. It is the residence of one of the city's founders, John Byram. The Historical Society provided research, and you can see the Byram House a little on the left here. If you just shoot up half a block up Glendale, you can see the back of the Byram House. It's very visible from the street. These 2 houses, or this is a duplex and this is, I believe, a single-family house, are 1920s bungalows that were developed on land that the Byram family owned by the Byram children. If we just looked at these without any Byram connection, we would say these are not 5-level properties. If we add the Byram connection, John Byram is the historic figure in the history of Glendale. His children are not. It is an interesting story to be told, but I strongly believe that making these 5s is, again, when we think about why we're doing this and what it means for property owners, this is where I think we really have to nail it and be solid among ourselves that this is truly a resource. And I think these properties are a bit of a stretch. So we do recognize their value as older properties and think the 6L code is appropriate. And then we have a grouping of commercial and industrial properties.
Wait, on the last one?
Sure.
So you have for HBC recommendation of 6L for the Byram properties?
Yes, you voted 3-1. Perhaps you were the dissenting vote. I don't have my notes with me. I'd have to go back. But
That's not what I have in my notes, but okay.
Oh,
I
really?
would have voted against. I would have been the dissenting vote.
And you might be.
You probably were. Yeah. Does anyone remember being the affirmative vote
Yes.
in terms of 6L?
No, I
or-
mean, keeping 6L.
Yeah, that's my memory of the
I think it
outcome.
was
So
more.
we have several commercial properties. There was some concern by the Historical Society that this property wasn't identified in the initial survey. That was an oversight due to an address mix-up. This property obviously is recognized by our consultant, by pretty much everyone who cares about mid-century buildings as an important building. It was previously identified as National Register eligible, California Register eligible in Glendale. The consultant looked at the history of the property. Every portion to the left-hand side where you see this brick box is an addition that was made in the early 60s. It's the kind of addition, it didn't even have these windows. These windows were added more recently, so it was basically a big brick box put up against the side. HRG felt that alone made it not National Register eligible, but still sees it, because this is the work of W.A. Sarmiento. We have a heritage with Sarmiento in Glendale. So we think it's California Register eligible and locally eligible. And hopefully that's enough. And the commission agreed with that, pending, actually we have pending HRG. I don't remember that there was, I think they did additional research about the addition after the meeting and came to that conclusion. 701 West Broadway is an interesting brick and glass block example of streamlined modern. HRG was not crazy about it. TGHS was, the commission was, I am. This moved up to the 5 category as one of the few examples we actually have of this style, and this is a very nice example and somewhat, it's not unique, but it's certainly unique for Glendale. The Great White Hut. We have never thought that this was anything less than an important building. Everybody loves the Great White Hut. TJHS recommended National Register significance for this. It was hard for us, for the consultant and for me to go there. The building has had some modest changes over the years, but putting it in as a 5 means it's well protected, and National Register status wouldn't change that. So we're comfortable with that recommendation, and I think, yeah, the commission voted unanimously for that. Okay, we're almost finished. These are another kind of one of the more controversial decision-making series of buildings. These are 3 commercial buildings that are next to each other. So if you look at in this building on the right-hand side, you see a little canopy held up with a little pipe column. Oops. That's this building with the kind of vaguely streamlined modern look that's been altered by the bars, but it's also not really much in terms of a streamlined modern building. And then there's the other building in the grouping. And these are designed by Merrill Baird, who designed the building that we're sitting in, or co-designed this building. And HRG struggled with looking at this as 5s. And when you look at each building individually, it's hard for me to look at these and say that looks, if someone came to me and said, oh, we're interested in nominating this building, I'd say, I don't see that. Of course, you're welcome to bring it to the commission. This portion obviously has a little more interest as an example of streamlined modern, but not a particularly good or intact example. And then there's the idea of grouping them together as a district. HRG did not see the value in this kind of small district, especially when we do have other industrial properties that we're going to be looking at, especially when we do the West Glendale survey. And so it's not like industrial is a rare type, it's just a very small area of the South Glendale plan area contains industrial buildings. So this is another situation where there was disagreement with both HRG and the commission. I would have trouble telling an owner of this building that they were individually significant and they would need to do an EIR if they proposed to tear it down. And I hope that, you know, everyone, public and the commission, uses that as kind of a baseline. You know, obviously there are historic resources that are critical to the city's history and that we need to protect as best we can. But when we start getting to things like this, I really question the value of that kind of designation. So, moving on, if you don't have questions there, we have 4500 San Fernando, which was originally given a 6Z. The consultant thought it was a different building, the building at, I think, 3901 San Fernando that's slated for demolition. Commission voted for this to be 5S3 pending HRG relook, and everyone now agrees to raise this to a 5 level. It is one of the rare and one of the better examples of these kind of early brick commercial buildings on San Fernando Road. We have 3 buildings in the Diamond Planning District. A planning district for the public is not a historic district, but it's a potential concept that Glendale may implement to protect neighborhoods that have a consistent character, but that character isn't necessarily a historic character. The neighborhood has changed so much that it doesn't cohere as a historic district. It may have had too many alterations to meet the minimal threshold for a district, but nonetheless retains a certain scale, a certain characteristic that could be protected through various means in a planning district. So these 3 houses were each identified individually by the Historical Society as 5S3. The commission voted to keep them as 5S3. Staff believes that this property should be 5S3, and HRG changed its determination for this one at 818 Gardena. Oops, wrong button. This building at 1832 Gardena, HRG kind of should just maintain its position in a planning district. There's a lot going on this building that's interesting, from the decorative niches in the stucco piers to the skirt at the base of the building where it flares out, to the shingles, to the lattice siding, to the truss in the gable. So staff is recommending that this one be pushed up to a 5 over HRG's opinion. And then finally, we have this building that has been a source of adoration by some. It is definitely an interesting and quirky building. HRG is, first of all, convinced, based on the methodology, this building has had its windows removed. That is kind of a dead deal for 5 status on even the early Craftsman buildings. There's also some concern about this, bizarre roof, but what I've learned over the years is, just because something's bizarre doesn't mean it's not original. So I think there's room for debate on this one, but HRG is comfortable putting it as a planning district. Staff thought, at least with a 6L, we're going to protect its overriding characteristics. And then we have this final grouping of other. This is the house on West Acacia, 316 West Acacia. It's a modest example of the Craftsman style, but it is very intact. The issue for HRG was not that was basically that there's just not much going on here for us to be working with. Although this is one that the commission voted 5-0 to keep as a 5. HRG is focusing on it as a 6L. We didn't revise this at the last minute. I'm somewhere on the cusp with this one. So if this came up as if the commission wanted to maintain its position to bump this to a 5, I think that would be appropriate.
It is. It's a Glendale modest. It's for many, many people in the 10s and 20s that came to Glendale that didn't have a lot of money. That's kind of house they were built.
But we are protecting many Glendale modists through the identified properties already. And again, I want the commission to just be careful when we make decisions, just in general, not just here. A 5 status code changes things for people, and we just need to make sure it's really telling the story, that it's historic rather than just historical. Chevy Chase, HRG was going to restudy this, and they did. I should have mentioned earlier, there were some issues with consistency among the pre-1918 Craftsman style buildings and some of the even earlier buildings. So HRG went back and reevaluated all of those buildings as a group, focusing on them as a group, and then putting it up against the methodology. And so for each of these properties, including this one, there's been that reevaluation. HRG came back with the idea that this was still a 6L. Alterations include replacement windows on the front facade with aluminum sliders. We know that security bars and security doors can be removed, but the windows were kind of a deal breaker. So HRG is recommending a 6L for this, and we still have, this didn't get updated either. Staff was fine with that, and I guess the commission's decision was based on the restudy. So if you want to comment when I'm done, I guess, since we haven't commented specifically yet, and we might want to go through these things. That one we'll look at. 350 West Doran is a 6L based on commission's vote from the last hearing. This is one of the ones that hurts also because this is 1903, a very altered building that, again, was voted 3-1 from the commission to make it a 6L. HRG is recommending a 6Z. We could keep it as a 6L and keep the porch columns intact and keep those few original windows that are in the left-hand bay but not in the right-hand bay. But this house is really a mess, and it's unfortunate because when you look at the roof form, you just know, oh, that's really early. That's a piece of early Glendale. But the rest, there's a lot gone there. And then this is the property at 206 Maple. There are some buildings behind it. HRG was very intrigued and questioning of the roof structure of this house, of this kind of cat slide roof over the porch. They went back and did their restudy for this, and finding it, and early example of multifamily residential development because there are other units behind the house, and then also because it's the work of Charles Shattuck, who's been identified as an early Glendale architect of some interest, that was bumped up to a 5. And last but not least, we should have ended with the other one because that's a much better,
Yeah, it was.
little ending. Sorry. This is another one that after HRG's review, they concluded was a 6L, partial enclosure of the front porch, large rear addition, alterations at the roof line. This is a funky house. It has a hipped roof over one side and a gabled roof over the other, and kind of coheres and kind of makes sense in its way, but it's totally weird for a craftsman, which could be a good thing, but I think there are too many strikes against this one, and it was determined to be a 6L. So,
Thank you.
if you guys have any thoughts or specific comments, but we will be amending the survey form as it moves forward in the process. We can't amend it for the draft EIR because that document is in play and we can't go and change that. But based on the determinations here, we'll make those changes, and then any others that you want to discuss tonight, or as I mentioned, we can talk about this in the future still.
We have some speaker cards. Maybe we get all information first, and then we can talk among ourselves and give you feedback. That works for you?
I'm just getting some.
Okay. But first of all, I'd just like to say thank you both to the TGHS and also to HRG for being willing to take the time to do extra research, extra surveying, take criticism, critique from other agencies, and do it respectfully and share your opinions respectfully. So I know it's been a long process, and sometimes it's been better than others, but tonight I hope we can continue in that vein. So with that, we have a few speaker cards. Catherine Yurka.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wait, your slideshow?
Yeah. I need.
Excuse me. No? Well, yeah, when I'm done, I'll give
Okay.
you those.
I forgot that I have a time limit, so I'm going to cut as I go, but I think it might go over primarily with the historic district that we're suggesting. And don't be alarmed by the first slide. We are not relitigating.
Well, these are skinny and stretched out the other way.
Yeah.
That's right. It all merges in our brains.
I just really like this this opening slide. So, and I agree. I want to thank staff and HRG for spending so much time on the kind of, as we winnow down, give up what we feel like we can't win and kind of press ahead with what we think we should win. So I'm just going to cover a handful of properties that you just heard about. The first, this one really puzzles us, I have to say. Not the lack of a 5S3 individually eligible designation, but not seeing it as a historic district. These are 4 contiguous industrial buildings built by a very prominent local architect and Glendale resident, Merrill Baird. As you heard, he designed this building with A.C. Martin. 2 of his other buildings are also on the Glendale Register. Those are both residences. These were all designed for a single client, Fred Peterson, who owned Modern Refrigerator Works, a business that was in Glendale for almost 70 years and was located in 823 Milford as well as 514. This is 823. This is the 4th building that was actually found individually eligible. These 3 buildings qualify as 6L. Which means that they maintain sufficient integrity to warrant special consideration in planning as a cluster of intact industrial buildings. In other words, they maintain enough integrity also to be contributors to a historic district. 2 or more buildings can qualify as a district. And I can't remember exactly how Jay put it, but it sounded like HRG didn't want to make it a historic district. They didn't really, I couldn't understand, but it seems to me that through the significance of the architect, the similarity of the buildings, and the fact that they were found eligible in the San Fernando Road corridor to be the 800 block of Milford and 500 block of commercial contain the best examples of a group of industrial buildings from the second quarter of the 20th century. It's recommended that these buildings be considered eligible for the National Register. Now, originally this was 7 buildings. 2 have been altered significantly recently. So we're not comfortable making a case that these 7 should be eligible as a historic district. But the preparer of that survey did not know that 4 of the buildings were all designed by the same architect. And it just seems self-evident to us that that would qualify as a historic district. Okay, and then I don't really have, I'm just going to skip 801 Milford. This is the one that hasn't been altered since the survey was done. It had been elevated to 5S3 by HRG at our behest, and it's dropped back to 6L, and we're not quite sure why. The original survey had noted that there were some infill windows, and then also windows covered with metal covers, so that hasn't changed. I don't have a lot to add about the Armory building, except that it's an intact and elegant mid-century modern institutional building, and it was found eligible for the Glendale Register and the California Register for its architecture. It does not appear to have been altered since that time. We don't understand why it's being downgraded. We heard that it's late, a late example. I don't know why that would be disqualifying. It's modest. I don't think it's modest, and I hope that you had a chance to go and see it. It does not photograph well, although it photographs better like this than when it's all squished. But I think it is actually a very elegant and substantial building. It really makes a statement on that block of Colorado. The Dunn Edwards building, I did a lot of research today, so I'm gonna throw it at you. We've talked about the architecture. It's surveyed and found eligible. It's a landmark on Broadway. What we learned was that, what we learned is that longtime Glendale resident from at least 1936 until his death in 1956, Frank Dunn of Dunn Edwards started with a Los Angeles wallpaper company in 1925. He added a paint line in 1927. By 1937, the company was struggling in the Depression, but nonetheless had 2 stores in Los Angeles, as well as a small 1-person factory. Arthur Edwards joined the company in 1938, first as a salesman and later as a business partner. In 1944, they incorporated as Dunn Edwards. Edwards was a former contract painter, and he emphasized high-quality paint, high-quality stores, and outstanding customer service. This location was their 3rd store at 501 East Broadway, and it was their first in the post-war period. And they did this in time to take advantage of the post-war housing boom. Oh, you can't really see it, but this is an ad from 1951. These are all the stores that carry Dunn Edwards paint. There are only 3 that are Dunn Edwards stores, 2 in Los Angeles, and then that 3rd one in Glendale. So it opened in 1947, and that's actually the effective year built according to the LA County Assessor's Office, even though the building is dated originally to 1945. By the time of Arthur Edwards' death in 1988, the LA Times called Dunn Edwards a paint empire with with stores throughout Los Angeles, California, and Arizona. His son, Ken Edwards, who lived in Glendale from at least 1972 until his death in 2013, went to work at Dunn Edwards in 1971 in research and development. He was the CEO from 2001 to 2010. He was a very notable chemist who specialized in architectural and industrial paint formulations. He had numerous patents, and he received many honors and awards. He was also responsible for the construction of the first LEED Gold certified paint manufacturing and district facility in the world. Both of Dunn Edwards' original Los Angeles stores at 463 South Vermont and 1838 South Flower have been demolished. And so we believe 501 East Broadway is eligible for its architecture as previously surveyed, and for the Glendale and California registers under the associative criterion as the oldest remaining retail store of a major Southern California company with close ties to Glendale, and which is now one of the world's leading manufacturers and distributors of architectural, industrial, and high-end, high-performance paint. Okay. Sorry, I thought that was really exciting. Okay, and then I won't go through all of the words. But we believe that the Geneva, Howard, and Isabel historic planning district should be a historic district. You can see the definition of planning district does not retain sufficient historic integrity for designation as historic districts. And then this one in particular is composed of period revival craftsman-style single-family residences, primarily constructed in the 20s. It conveys a strong sense of time and place. However, due to alterations to individual residences throughout the area, it's no longer qualifies as a historic district. We actually dispute that, and we suggest a proposed period of significance from 1913, when the first two craftsman contributors were built, through 1951, when the last two duplexes were built. Francesca Smith found 66 out of 96 properties to be contributors, which is 69%. And it is not a single family area. It is a mix of single family and multifamily buildings, and that is throughout the period of significance. So here is, sorry, so that's one of the original houses. So this is a, that's a duplex. This is a duplex. Here we have, I think that's, oh, sorry, that one is a, oh, darn, I'm misremembering now. Duplex, fourplex, and another duplex. So there's really a number of multifamily buildings here. And although many buildings do date from the 1920s, there are 10 contributors from the teens, 24 from the 1930s and 40s. And don't quote me on those numbers because I had to do this really fast. And then there are 2 from the 1950s. So it really crosses a period of time for several decades. The neighborhood thus represents a broad swath of Glendale development, in particular South Glendale's completely characteristic flexibility in zoning that allowed and encouraged a combination of multifamily and single-family residences. This is the only historic district in the survey, and I think in Glendale, that would combine single-family and multifamily properties. The other eligible historic districts in the survey are either or. If South Glendale is going to have a historic district that represents the most significant residential development trend in this area, and there's something that distinguishes it from other communities, is this really early blending of these, then it's going to be this one. And these are just a couple. And 523 North Howard, I actually thought that the HPC had recommended, this is a perfectly intact and lovely clipped colonial craftsman, and I thought you guys had recommended moving that to 5S3. That was in our notes. But anyway, it's 6L. This is my favorite of the single-family houses on Howard. This one was 535 Geneva. This was found 5S3 in the first draft of the survey, and it's now downgraded to 6L.
I think that's just a mistake. It's 5S3 also in the map for the proposed district, so I think that's just an oversight. We all agree this is a 5S3.
Oh, okay, good.
I have a note already to fix that.
Oh, fantastic, because it was moved to the 6L spreadsheet.
Whatever happened,
Okay.
happened.
Okay, great. Oh, yay.
We'll fix it.
Okay, woo, success. But I want more. Oops, sorry, I'm gonna leave that one. So there are 5 larger late 80s and early 90s buildings on the east side of Isabel. They're there, can't miss them. Other than that, this area is unmarred by the substantial contemporary infill development that has altered so much of the character of South Glendale neighborhoods, as the survey notes, and has precluded the vast majority of them from qualifying as planning districts, let alone as historic districts. And in fact, if you go just one block over to the 400 and 500 block of Jackson, it's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just full of those contemporary large buildings. These condominiums or apartment buildings or whatever they are do not alter the residential character of the neighborhood. They're residential buildings. And if they were from the late 1970s, one could potentially include them as part of a period of significance, as this is completely characteristic of Glendale's development pattern. So I looked up, and I didn't have a lot of time to do this, I looked up historic districts that have similar kinds of intrusions of non-contributors. And they do exist, you know, where you'll have buildings that are really kind of discordant. And I'll just give you one example, Baltimore's Market Center Historic District. And I went to school in Baltimore, so that's fondness for me. It was designated in 2000 on the National Register. It's the city's historic shopping district. It's dates from 1820 to 1945. But major late 20th century buildings intrude on the historic scale and architectural fabric of the historic districts. But these additions were imagined as sort of compatible because they're shopping, they're shopping spaces. Even mid-century high-rise garages were not considered disqualifying because the district retained sufficient integrity from the period of significance, as Isabel, Howard, and Geneva does. So while you can certainly regret the more contemporary development, it does not disqualify this as a district. And the only last two things I'll say is 316 West Acacia, that cute little craftsman that you spoke up about, Commissioner Morgan. If you're on the fence, then I think you should cross over to 5S3. And also 121 West Chevy Chase, I wanted to point out there was one window replacement in the front facade. It's not that all the windows were replaced. They're supposed to be greater latitude. It seemed to be the original opening, so I'll just throw that out for what it's
There
worth.
isn't greater latitude for craftsman houses. It's for the earlier development.
But it's 1913, isn't that?
But it's a craftsman, yeah, it's for the earlier houses, pre-craftsman houses, clearly laid out in the methodology.
Pre-craftsman?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, thank you very much.
Isn't it a craftsman style house?
Yeah, it's a craftsman.
Yeah, it's not pre-craftsman.
Thank you. Okay, next speaker is Andrew Allison.
Hi, good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. This will be quick. I'm a resident of South Glendale. I live in Adams Hill. I think some of you have been to my house, actually. I just wanted to commend the city of Glendale, for undertaking this important survey and the effort that went into it. I want to commend the commission, you guys, for your interest and advocacy in maintaining the important historical resources for South Glendale. And then I'd like to commend the Historical Society also for their above and beyond duties and actions in identifying buildings that were missed in the survey, or propose more effective designations and consideration of their qualities as a historic resource. Simply put, I'd like to thank the city and you guys for what you've done. I'm pleased with a lot of the survey. In living in Adams Hill, my only kind of regret is that there aren't more historic districts in Adams Hill area. I know we've got our Cottage Grove and the Cottage Grove extension and this new Glendale Heights, which is a portion of Adams Hill, but there are so many beautiful homes, beautiful streets that really hang together in Adams Hill. And I'm thinking of like the Five Sisters up on the hill below the cemetery. I call it our mid-century bend in the road on Romulus Drive. There are a number of other places that I would like to work for personally in the future to have consideration as historic districts as well. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, Arlene Bedore. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much for everything. I really miss you all terribly.
You miss us so much today.
Yeah, and that's why I came back, because I wanted to compliment you, Jay, the staff, the entire staff working with Jay, and probably the hardest working historical society on the planet, the Glendale Historical Society. Kathy, you're amazing, and Greg, you've just done such a wonderful job in leading the organization that, you know, I just feel like we have an embarrassment of riches in engagement and interest in all of this right now. It's sort of like a golden era of loving what the city is all about. However, there are a couple things that I wanted to mention, and the first one is a question. It seems to me, based on my past experience of evaluating potential designations, that we kind of have a little bit more of a magnanimous attitude when somebody comes to the commission with, you know, an owner wanting to register their property. But when it's a designation that's coming from a third party or being decided by somebody else, we're being a lot tougher on the property. I can remember a couple times when, you know, the answer was no, for good reason, and sometimes the answer was yes, and I'm thinking, why is this, you know, this thing isn't even intact? Why are we, you know, there's been a lot of variability in the assessment, and I feel like there may be a little bit of a double standard with an owner coming versus a designation being decided upon by a third party. We seem to be much more forgiving of certain minor breaches in intactness when the owner is coming in front of the commission versus this situation. And that's a generalization. I would say, all in all, it's not true. The decision making has been spectacular, but just in the few cases that have been cited. And I'm not picking on you, Jay, but there were a few things where I thought, gee, if the owner came with this house and these were the things that were at issue, I think it probably would have gone through, or people would be in favor of it. So it's just something to think about. I feel like there's two different standards of evaluation happening here, and you don't have to comment, or you can, send me away. But that was just my impression. With regard to a few things that have been mentioned, I really, really hope that the the former Milford Historic District, the Factory District, can be reconsidered. It was a very exciting thing to see that on the reconnaissance survey for the San Fernando corridor when it came through. I'm, very passionate about our commercial architecture, and these are some really fine buildings here, either by architecture or by architectural pedigree with Merrill Baird, and they've already been at one time decided on to be worthy of districting. So I hope that makes the cut. With regard to Adams Hill, which is where I live, I have to echo my neighbor's sentiments a little bit. Of course, I'm a little disappointed that Adams Square doesn't make the cut. There are three very important buildings there: the gas station, the Adams Square building, and what used to be the first Baskin-Robbins, which now is covered up by an inappropriate facade. But I realize there just isn't enough there for a historic district. But I hope we can somehow call attention to it, maybe as a planning district or something. But on the subject of planning districts, I'm not sure that's the way we want to go with anything where we could designate it as a potential historic district. Certainly, nobody's been prohibited from demolishing what were designated as potential historic districts. When you look at Cedar Harvard area, the Craftsman area, parts of the Diamond, some sections of Riverdale, and other areas that have really eroded. I mean, these were considered to be historic district potentials at one point, and were surveyed as such. So we should at least go to that level. I think planning district sounds like kind of a cop-out, like we're just afraid we're going to run into conflict if we call it a potential historic district. So I would ask that wherever we have designated something a planning district, we change it to potential historic district. We're not designating it, we're just giving it an identity. So that's one thing. One thing that comes to mind is the Heidi Boynton tract in Adams Hill, and certainly many of the streets, as Andrew mentioned, that are intact and have a historic development pattern. Maybe we want to look at those a little bit more closely, and maybe some of us neighborhood folks should be doing that. I totally agree with the Historical Society about Isabel Howard, Geneva. I think that's really a special area, and it's in a unique location in Glendale, and we should really consider that for potential historic district status. I think that was it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last speaker, Francesca Smith.
Should start that earlier.
If you can, I think it's called Suppose You Drive.
Could you hand me the keyboard? Then I'll hand it back to you.
All right.
Let's go in. Tell me again what it's called?
Suppose you drive.
Suppose you drive. Okay. Actually, I didn't need the keyboard. Sorry.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having everyone and listening to everyone's opinions. As you know, I'm an architectural historian. I do this all over the country. My first survey was in 1980. I don't count it because I was an undergraduate. In Charleston, South Carolina, there are intrusions in the historic districts like gas stations. You could imagine those National Register districts didn't have gas stations during the period of significance. They're merely non-contributors. So some of those gas stations now are from periods we'd be very excited about in Glendale, but they're non-contributors because they're not part of that period of significance. In historic districts, and in the Isabel, Geneva, Howard Historic District, when I walked it recently, I was surprised to see patterns of streetlight standards. On one street, it had the ones with the G's with the Indian motif at the bottom. On another street, they had the poured stone, which is really concrete, but decorative streetlight standards that should be considered in the historic district consideration. When we evaluate the effects of intrusions in a district's integrity, we take consideration the relative number, size, design, scale, and location of those components that don't contribute to the significance. As you know, a district isn't eligible if it contains so many alterations or new intrusions that it no longer conveys the sense of a historic environment. So a component of a historic district cannot contribute to the district if it's been substantially altered or if it doesn't share the historic associations of the district. If you can picture with me now in your heads the University of Southern California National Register Historic District, it includes non-contributors that include 2 single-family homes that are from the period of significance, but they weren't associated with the university until recently, significantly altered buildings, and large new buildings constructed after the close of the period of significance. So those are kinds of things that are a little bit like the condos on the Isabel, Geneva, Howard area. You know, the School of Engineering and so forth were far later, but they're still part of the historic district. They're just non-contributors. Mount Vernon, where I'm from, I always bring up as an example, it has giant, very modern intrusions, including an auditorium, a museum, and an education center. They just don't contribute to the significance of the rest of the property. I wanted to talk very briefly about enclosed porches. In my agency, we have properties that are determined eligible for the National Register that have enclosed porches. If it occurs during the period of significance, which is normally not a single year, then an enclosed porch can be permissible. And there are properties that are listed in the National Register and determined eligible with enclosed porches. To the fantastic 4:30 p.m. PowerPoint, I'll go quickly. The Suppose You Drive building, I wasn't familiar with it. I knew the name growing up partly in this area. It was built in 1947. The family started it in 1936. They hired an architect named John Mackle, who was also a structural engineer. I think he cared a little bit more about how things stood up rather than how they looked. It's a relatively uncommon Glendale example of an unpainted brick, streamlined modern building. Soon after they completed it, the family engaged him to design the rear portion, which is a 1-story long loading dock. There are a number of other little additions that are not on the property. That's the Suppose You Drive central thing. The family still owns the property. I'm going to try to not just read it to you. I'm trying to go quickly on this. You'll notice the signs. When the family founded this, she was a Glendalian, he was not. He had the idea in the 1930s that people only needed trucks for a little bit of time, and it was pretty revolutionary. The family moved on to revolutionize the trucking industry, leasing them to big companies so the companies don't have to care for them. It was Eddie and Millie. They're both there. Millie remained the comptroller of the treasurer of the company until 2000. She was in her late 80s. She liked writing checks, she said. They ended up becoming competitors of Penske, Ryder, international names. I have a list of properties that were designed by John E. Mackle, the engineer / architect who did both. They lived at Omar Street in Pelanconi. It's my understanding the family I think sold it after Millie's death. So they're pretty entrenched in Glendale. Their son came to work for the business. He recently passed away. He brought his sons in. The sign was designed, I think 2 years after the building was completed. It's a painted sheet metal sign. You'll notice it has curved corners, like the Streamline Modern design. The funny thing was, I was shocked to see that their current logo is based on this design. They maintain the colors and so forth, and it's central to their corporate identity. The fact that they still have these signs is amazing. They have, in 1952, I think they had 14 ads in the local directory. It became a global industry. There have been alterations to this building. It's no longer a retail business. People don't walk over from their apartment to rent a truck to move somewhere. So they don't have people walking in off the street. The curved entrance that has stack bond bricks and glass block windows is still there. They've infilled where the door was. There's a second floor door, probably to a staircase, which is probably the office. That's absolutely intact. I think they may have changed the locks. The two windows at the ground floor level have been altered. The second floor windows are steel sash, multi-light, absolutely intact. On the second floor on this side, the north side, they replaced one window. The other two are intact. The curved canopy that goes around it is bare metal, which is absolutely a Streamline Modern feature. You see the curved corner, the glass block. The question of the bricks, the first floor is Roman brick, and the second floor is common brick in a running bond. The common brick is throughout the north side. You can tell there was talk before what's going on with the bricks. Maybe the architect just wanted to do something special at the first floor. We can't read his mind. At the top, at the parapet, there are soldier bricks that line that curve that make it really stand out. The period of significance I'm recommending is 1947, when they moved into this building, not when the business was established, through 1983, when Mr. Johnson Sr. passed away. I think he was a frugal guy. There weren't a lot of changes to this building. They started out in probably this location in 1936. I went through the established registration requirements that were in the South Glendale survey, and it meets, it's an excellent and rare example of Streamline Modern. It's a particularly rare style, significant under architecture and design. I think it's more significant for its association with the family and the development of the truck leasing business. And it remains their main office, I think. They have they have a huge facility in Norwalk, but this is their main office. It meets criteria 1 and 3, and we believe it should be considered a historical resource. You may have learned more from this than you learned from the table, with just a few things, which I think is hard to follow, especially when you're trying to make these decisions. This is a matchbook cover that I believe is from post-1972. That's because they had the Southgate location, which is what they call Norwalk. I don't know why. But
They still use the exchanges.
But they weren't their original exchanges. They had earlier ones. But I think it's an extraordinary example of a locally significant property. I evaluate properties every day for the National Register. I would slow down, I would take a picture, and I would do a full evaluation for this. And at my agency, we only do a full evaluation when the property retains enough integrity to be recognizable. I usually do these forms in 2 pages because they're for giant projects. They only want to see a little bit. I made this longer because it seems that you haven't been given very much information. So I hope this helps satisfy your curiosity about suppose you drive.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing. So comments and discussion. Maybe my recommendation would be we only talk about those that there is some difference in opinion from the final HRG decision on our spreadsheet to minimize the time.
Okay, good idea.
Does that work for everybody? So whoever would like to start?
Well, I just wanted to say that I agree with Francesca when it comes to enclosed porches. So I'm looking at this list, and somehow my notes are different than the notes that are here. So, without reviewing the tape, I can't comment on a few of them. So, but on most of them, they seem to be correct as long as I just keep going back to this thing that was written by the President Greg Grammer about historic context. The historic context statement specifically allows eligibility if a property retains the majority of its character-defining features, which I feel on some of the pre-1918 ones are, except they have porches. But we're telling you the porches don't. And the other thing is, as you know, a property with a status code of 6L in the survey is not considered a historic resource and can be demolished through design review. And that is my concern. I mean, and I understand Mr. Platt's concern about the 40 properties and influencing people's lives and making it a lot harder for the property to go away. We're talking about 40 of them, but if you're one of the 40, that's not a great thing. But we are the Historic Preservation Commission, and I think my job is to preserve. And, having looked at these properties, that some of them, I understand HRG and I compliment them on their work, but after we're all gone from this meeting or no longer on the commission or anything else, these properties will either be there or not be there by the decisions we make. So that's my comment on them. If you want to go individually through all of them, I can, but most of them I conclude they're correct. A few of them I believe the HPC recommendation was for rather than against. So.
Yeah, for the porches, it was 4-1 to put those as 5s. So you're right, you were with the majority on that. So.
Okay, so.
So did you want to look at them again, or?
Well, the only ones that I have are the Byram properties, to tell you the truth. It says 3-1. I can't believe I was the outlier, but I could have been. So that's my concern.
Well, you weren't one of the 3, I don't think.
Yeah, well, one, I don't remember, somebody had to leave. Maybe Mr. Doom had to leave at
Yeah,
the
we only
time.
had 4 of you for part of that hearing.
But we seem to have gone 4-0 for the 5S3 or the 5, I don't,
You're talking about just the enclosed porches.
Yeah, I'm talking just about the enclosed porches on most of them.
Yeah, that was earlier in the hearing, so all of you were here in
Yeah.
the 4-1 votes.
Yeah, and it was like we were for the properties, and I think the properties prior, that's the thing that I keep coming back to that keeps hitting the head. The historic context statement specifically allows eligibility if a property retains the majority of its character-defining features, and unfortunately, I don't see porches as being.
Well, I think on that type, it's craftsman style.
I also think it's important the historic context wasn't based on a specific survey methodology based on the early surveys that were done of the city to develop the methodology. When you look at the survey methodology, it's very clear that that wouldn't be allowed for a 5, and the context was written more broadly, but it's worth noting, definitely.
Well, I think,
but the context isn't the binding decision-making tool for this. It's the actual survey methodology, which is based on the framework of the context and may have gotten more specific or possibly more lenient in some cases based on what resources were on the ground.
I understand what Ms. Vidor had said, you know, if the people had come on these individual houses, we probably would have been a lot more lenient. And it's just presented to us, and this is, one side says, this is good, and this is not so good, and we have to make a decision on
And
it.
to be honest, that's the value of a survey. The survey applies a rigorous methodology and comes to conclusions based on that. If the owner of one of those houses came to the commission and said, would you designate us based on the fact that, sorry, we have this enclosed porch, if the commission's inclined to do that, it's the commission's, you know, it would
Right.
become
No, I
the
understand.
property, so.
Well, in some of those cases, we also have the right to add a condition on
Right,
it, right? I
correct.
mean, in that case, if someone brings it forward, we can say, hey, this isn't great, so fix this if you really want the designation. So it's a little bit different when it goes backwards like this. Jay, what is the ramification of naming something a potential historic district for the properties within that area?
Once we have status codes identified, which would be a contributor would be a 5 code at this point, and a non-contributor would be a 7 code at this point, according in Glendale's way we do status codes. We would, if someone proposes to tear one of those down and it's a 5, we say this is a contributor to the historic district. Someone would then have to go do an analysis of whether this would affect the historic district as an intact district. Because Glendale's historic districts are different than in some other cities where the district is considered the historic resource rather than the individual properties. And this goes way back to the formation of the city's decision-making about districts. That's not standard in other cities and could be open to change in the future if there's advocacy from the community or the commission or otherwise. But that's currently what it would be. So we'd look and say, how many contributors are there? Would this have an impact on the district? But overall, we've been doing this for years now with the Cumberland Heights district, for example, where portions of that hadn't been designated. And we work with the applicants to make sure that the aspects that you see from the street retain the character, which was what we would do if it were a historic district. And I can't think that we've had any demolition proposals except the one on Valley View, which was a very complicated story that doesn't really set precedent here.
So anything that I'm just a little bit confused still about the historic district thing. That if we put it on there, obviously it's not a historic district. It would still require the residents of that neighborhood to band together and to create an actual historic district.
Right.
Our recommendation.
But there's still CEQA implications through our design review process. Because Glendale has discretionary permits, we have to apply CEQA to every property. And if we felt that the proposal was going to diminish the historic district in some way, we would be obligated to either work with the applicant to make sure the work didn't do that or bring them through the EIR process if it did.
So it would be another sort of layer, because if, for instance, there's already a 5S3 property within the boundaries of what could be what we're recommending would be a historic district. If that wasn't there, that 5S3 would still remain there, obviously.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's a little complicated. This is a strange thing in Glendale because a 5 generally is a historic resource. Glendale has interpreted that in historic districts differently than I think many other cities do. And partly that may have been a factor of how reluctant Glendale was coming to developing a historic district process and how there was so much concern to get community buy-in and not make these things seem so scary that it may have, in the process of creating how we regulate historic districts, affected the way we think about it. Now we're 10, 11 years into historic districts. They're running relatively smoothly. Things might be different now, and that could be something that could be reevaluated. But nonetheless, we still work with people to try to avoid removing character-defining features, even if it's not going to destroy the historic district through the loss of that property. And usually we're successful in doing that.
So
Okay, let's go back to the closed-in porches, if we can just at
you wanna
least
finish that?
address one topic.
Okay.
You've shared your opinion. Does anyone have anything else to do on enclosed porches, or are you fine with the final HRG?
You know, I generally concur with your opinion, but I understand both sides of the argument. I don't know if you want to look at, if there's any interest in looking at those 4 properties again, or if we just want to move forward.
Easy enough.
Because of the 4 properties, I think they're all craftsmen, if I recall. And open porches are a key defining feature of craftsman architecture. So I agree with the consultant HRG in this case that they they are a detriment to the architectural style, and therefore would be fine to pass on these four.
Where'd they go?
Where did they go?
There they go.
I think we heard other arguments, though, that other agencies do elevate certain resources.
That may be true of
I'm
certain
not-
agencies, but I have done, I talk to consultants all through Los Angeles County regularly, and I've taken it just because of this discussion, which I think is very interesting. I've talked to several other consultants besides HRG, presenting, you're doing a survey, you find a craftsman, it has a porch enclosed, or it has siding covered or replaced. What do you do? And the answer of everyone I've talked to has been that becomes either a non-contributor, not a 5, whatever. But there's room, consultants don't always agree, obviously, and we're going to see that forever.
And this is my personal
That's
opinion
anecdotal,
on
but
on the architecture of those porches detract it completely from my opinion. I would not designate as an eligible resource in the condition it was.
Yeah,
If
and again, if there was advocacy in the community to go to owners and say, you have a beautiful house, you could save a decent amount of money on your taxes, you should look into nominating this, and you might have to take out your porch, and if someone bites, I think that's great for all of us. But right now, it diminishes the survey to include buildings that have been so deeply altered from key character features. It's not just a window here or there, this is like in your face.
Anyone else on that topic?
If we leave it as it is because of the porches, and it is demolished, what could be built there?
It depends on the zone.
Well,
So,
where are they, what is the current zoning?
I don't know for each of these.
Because I look at all the,
properties.
like, the
This
stuff right there.
obviously is a multifamily zone, an apartment building could
Right,
be
so
built
that could be demolished and put up a multi-use apartment building right there.
Sure.
Multi,
Mhm.
that's what we're,
But that should not, I recommend, I can't tell the commission
Right.
how to think or behave, but you can't make decisions based on fear of what might come. That's not the proper
That's what
way to
history's
look
all
at
about.
things, so.
I don't know, I've read the Wright brothers, and the Wright brothers enclosed
Yes.
their own front porch, and
Listen.
I'd hate to designate their house because they added a front porch.
If I thought we could designate everything because of my fear of what might come, everything would be designated, so.
True. And right now, we're looking at them for architectural style. We don't know that there's a significant person or event that happened here
Well, we
in many
know
of
that
these
through-
enclosed porches.
Through the research that HRG did as part of this, that they didn't identify any significant people. There's always the possibility. Okay, those are the, so,
So it stands 4-1 like we did.
if,
HBC recommended 5S3.
well, 441 was in favor of 5S3, yeah.
Yes, for the four
So I don't know if
properties.
it stands, I haven't,
So that will be presented to the city council.
Well, you think
and-
you're looking for our input, and it will be between you, staff, and the consultant to make the final decision and report to council.
right, but with giving great weight to HBC's
Yeah.
decision,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, we already voted once to make those enclosed porch properties 5S3s, at least as a majority.
Yes.
That did not stand. So if we did it again today, would the same result occur?
Well, through the draft EIR process, yes, we'll bring it to the city council and say, we really, staff still, and some of these are gray, and we could go either way on a bunch of these, and we've already done that and seen that. With these, to me, it's such a clear-cut issue of standard preservation practice. We're only talking about 4 houses with the porches and I think 3 or 4 houses with the siding. And I don't believe we should be designating these 3-legged zebras or identifying them as eligible at this point. And like I said, if someone wants to come forward later and bring it in and maybe do some work on it, or even leave it, and perhaps, as you guys have discussed, the commission might say, well, the porch is of interest. Generally, I disagree with Mrs. Smith about the period of significance. The period of significance is usually the year the property was built, unless there's an association with events or people of significance, and that's again standard practice in our field. So it's harder to say that a porch was built during the period of significance if it's just a house that has lingered over the decades and important. porch was enclosed at some point, and some of these porch enclosures are probably early. This one we're looking at probably not so early. But,
So
yeah, I wasn't asking tonight for you to revisit every vote because we didn't want to go through that time-consuming task. What this exercise is basically saying that there are some things that HRG and staff have agreed to change. There are some things that are still a little bit in flux, and there are some things that, based on professional standards, were really reluctant. So I don't have to say it again. I've shared the view.
So I guess my question is, the question I just asked about those 4 properties, is that the same for this whole diagram? If we were to go back and re-vote on these things, this diagram is not changing, is that right?
It's not going to change for the draft EIR, but it's going to go into the comments. The commission's
Right.
comments that are on the draft EIR will then be relayed to planning and to council. Those will also be public hearings. And at some point, council may say, listen, this is the Historic Preservation Commission. We trust their judgment. Thank you, HRG, for your work. Thank you, staff, but we want to support the views of our commission. And there's a very good chance that that might happen, and all of these would become 5s. And I'm not going to be upset about that. It's just...
So presuming we're not changing our votes on this sheet right now, tonight, that's what will happen. We don't have to do it again, right? We don't have to make that statement again.
There may be part of the discussion tonight, part of HRG restudied some of these, and those are the ones that I thought you might be interested in commenting on. You can look and see which ones have changed and meet the commission's kind of original sense. And yeah, so this whole process tonight has been, I wasn't exactly sure what we would do here, so
Yeah, I think we should look at those that you feel strongly, against the final decision that's being presented here. Otherwise, like I say, we have gone through this one by one and voted on every single one. So unless information appeared today from either TJHS or HRG with their extra research that they did, those are probably the ones we should be addressing.
Yeah, for example, the research, on the Suppose You Drive building, I still do not believe that is an excellent example of streamlined modern, and will go to my grave believing that. But the commission may change their mind. But the interesting information about the business itself, which I believe there's not enough information as presented or when I skimmed over the report to make a case that this was a business that had an impact beyond being a successful business in Glendale. But there's a book that was written about this, and perhaps information from that book could be brought into the report that would, rather than saying ipso facto it is because I say so, we need to just see the evidence, and there's a very good chance that we would, that staff would support that change for criterion 1. So that's an example of moving forward. I think we'll share the GPR form that was submitted by Francesca with HRG. HRG will review that information, see what their professional opinion is, and possibly make a change just based on that, or possibly share my opinion, my initial opinion, I haven't read it thoroughly, that it might need to just be beefed up a little more, but there could be a real story there.
Okay.
Where did that property appear?
So, okay, so just so I'm clear. So can we, I guess, as commissioners then, since we're not all going to be voting on these things individually, make our own comments about specific properties?
Yeah,
and
we're gonna reference you by name. And,
Okay, so I will start.
All right.
I am Chris Craignati, Commissioner.
Good to meet you.
And I would like to say that I think that the Dunn Edwards building at 501 East Broadway should be elevated to 5S3.
And staff has already indicated we're
in line with that. Okay.
That will be changed.
For whatever it's worth with the federal government, I would like to see the Armory elevated to 5S3.
I concur.
Should we all agree, put our names in as well? Or?
It'll save us
It'll
time,
save
sure.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
concur.
So
I
let's
concur.
vote then.
Well, he knows who's the concluder.
Well,
We're
we're
not
not
making
zero
motions.
already.
We're not making motions.
Well,
so there's
that's
nothing to
true.
Okay. Since it was once found eligible to be some sort of a little district, I think the Merrill Baird district idea is a great idea. As a historic district, not just a planning district, those 4 buildings, the 3 on Commercial and the 1 on Milford.
Concurrence?
Yeah, any concurrences on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And
And Lorna, you were in there?
Yes.
And Desiree?
And the historic district for the Howard and Geneva and Isabel section. I was driving through that today, among the other buildings too, and it really does feel very like it's a time capsule, and I think it's very important that that be designated as such.
And though this may shock everyone, staff agrees that that does look like a potential upgrade.
Great.
We have this initial finding of contributors. We need 60% to be contributors, and we hear 69. Whether that's accurate or not will have to be seen, but we could recommend to HRG, which will require further funding for HRG, which we'll have to be doing soon anyways, possible additional study of that. So
I have a question there. What determined those 3 streets? As I drove through there, I would tend to agree that Geneva and Howard have a much better collection and more intact, where Isabel's got the 1980s.
although Isabel has a great collection of craftsmen, so one of the best groupings of craftsmen that I know.
And some of
I
them
was
were
just wondering,
smaller amounts.
was it an initial
It's
development,
because
or
of the
it's
existing
just
zoning. When you drive down the
Okay.
street, you see, oh my God, this is totally different. This feels like a single-family neighborhood with a few blips of these multifamilies. When you look at, I believe the area was downzoned at some point. Yeah.
Isabel?
Yeah, so 2 blocks, the Geneva side and the Isabel side are R3050, which is low density, allows duplexes, but not much else on regular city lots. Howard Street is an R1 district, so it's one of the only single-family districts in the flatlands of South Glendale. And that's why even when you look at the aerial, you see, oh, you can just do the boundary really easily. So I think it's definitely worth more study. I think HRG's initial assessment was that it didn't look like there were enough contributors to really make a district, and that's why they went with the planning district route. I just wanted to put in a plug for planning districts as a concept, only because I think most people looking at the Diamond District would agree that it may have been a historic district 30 years ago, but today it really couldn't be. But it still has this character. It still has this kind of single-family grain that is interesting, even with additions and alterations. So, but for Isabel, Howard, Geneva, I think we can make the recommendation for further study of that as a potential district.
That's good.
That concludes my comments.
Works well.
Anyone
That
else
works
have
well.
comments on other properties?
You've covered them all.
Sorry, did you address the armory? We addressed the
Yeah.
armory,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
I don't know that you concurred, so you can say now if you
Oh,
do.
she did.
No, I
He
do.
got hers.
I thought so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've gotten enough concurrence on the historic district, right?
Yeah, the Barrett
Yeah.
district, the commercial or the little industrial district, and the Isabel. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Any other comments?
They've all done a good job.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you again to both HRG and TJHS for your added research and preparation. Okay, shall we move on? Do you need any other votes or anything from us?
No, I'm probably going to be spending a lot of time going over the tape of this.
Lucky you.
I've got some. Yeah, I love that. You have no idea.
Well, and Jay,
hearing
hopefully-
my own voice at length.
You'll
Not a
you'll
good
be
thing.
incorporating some of the new arguments or comments or information that was brought in by TGHS today
About
The public
as you
comment.
prepare
yeah,
the comments
yeah.
that will go to council.
Well, actually, they've raised a couple that weren't on this sheet. I don't, and my notes started falling apart there. But yeah, for the most part, but it's their responsibility to submit their testimony to the upcoming hearings, Planning Commission and City Council. So they'll be responsible for doing that. Our job is to tell them what you guys, as one of the city's board and commissions.
Okay, great. So not to be cynical, but I think we've struggled with this so much. With this information has been difficult for us to sort of digest. And I'm sure TGHS will attend planning hearing, but I completely encourage you to do so.
You've had plenty of practice, so you'll be great.
Necessary.
Okay. Next item on the agenda.
Right.
7B, 1545 Virginia Avenue. This is a Glendale Register nomination and a Mills Act contract application.
Are you still awake?
We should be thankful for the owner's patience in sitting through this. Hopefully it was interesting enough. And I also have to apologize. Deepika, our wonderful preservation intern, prepared this report and was planning to be here to present it, but she was pretty sick today. And I said, go home.
Yes.
So I'm not going to be, as fluent in it as she would have been, but I'll do my best to kind of take you through what we've got. And I will preface this by saying we have a very interesting Tudor Revival property on Virginia Avenue. One of the things that struck me about this when we visited the site was this is one of those properties that has a lot of the bells and whistles at the front, which is pretty common for Tudors, and we've seen other houses, even houses of Glendale Register caliber, that when you turn the sides and come around to the back, it kind of slackens a bit. And this one is pretty good around the entire house, although of course the rear facade isn't quite as dynamic and exciting as the front facade. So here's the location up on Virginia, just north of Kenneth Road. Yeah, Kenneth Road there. We have a very good example of the Tudor Revival. Like I said, lots of character-defining features. The half timbering isn't it doesn't feel as applied as some half timbering. When you look at it closely, these are heavy timbers. They consistently through the house have a hand-hewn look, as if they were cut with an adze or an axe or something. Even the wood that fills the gables at the front here, and then also at other locations on the house, has this very rustic, very handmade feel. The bricklaying at the front, the corners of the front entry are very interesting. You have a characteristic Tudor arch at the entrance. The chimney is very interesting with the mixture of brick and stucco, which is another character feature. And then we have these hand-hewn lintels over a lot of the windows and some beautiful leaded glass work at the front, and there's also stained glass at other locations in the house. There's porte cochere, and then just the overall characteristic volumes and overall form of Tudor Revival houses with the big front-facing gables, the steeply pitched roof, and a variety of roof forms. So here are some details. I'm sorry, this isn't, I didn't put it to full screen. Front door. The lintel over the door is even more elaborate than the other lintels. It has some actual carving in it, which is something we don't see all the time. We have these wood corbels holding up the wood beams. So that in many ways, this feels very much like a English or German kind of piece of construction. And not all of our Tudor houses, I think, have this sense of massiveness and just heavy timber use. A beautiful oriel window at the front, this little two-sided oriel with the pattern leaded glass and the copper roof. The bay window again at the bottom there. This is a view from the back, looking back towards the porte cochere. We see here we're losing the half timbering a little bit, but we still have the hand-hewn look of the lintel over this door. This bay window is a later addition, and the owners may want to speak to what their plans are for that area. And then at the back of the house, as I mentioned again, we have some of these characteristic features and forms. The gable with this rustic siding in it, this wood bay window with leaded glass, original steel casement windows throughout the house, and then this variety of roof forms that really gives it a kind of interesting character. The backyard, the garage is original. The garage doors aren't. We'll talk about that in a second. And a very deep backyard that has kind of three parts. The part close into the house, which is under this magnificent oak tree. A central portion next to the garage where there's the pool, which is a later addition from the late 50s, and this pool house. And then the rear portion of the house is kind of an open yard. What I should do before I go on, because I'm not following the script very well, tell you when this house was built. It was built in 1930. It was built or designed by an architect named Jean Verge, who the submission has a report that kind of lists a bunch of his work, and very interesting career and very interesting output from Jean Verge. As is often the case, we don't quite have enough information to say that this house represents something major in his career or that he changed the field through the design of this house. But I think we can look at him as a very interesting designer and did a really good job with this property. It was built by Ernest Grether, and builders aren't usually of great interest, but Grether had a firm, Grether and Grether, that had a building in downtown LA on South Los Angeles Street that's actually being converted into lofts right now, and I think it's on the Los Angeles, it's a historic cultural monument, so that is of interest. And it was originally built for it was built for Mr. Grether, and so he built it to Verge's design for him and his family, and they lived there until 1950, so from 1930 till 1950. It was subsequently purchased by William Howard Peters and his family. Peters was kind of a local mucky-muck. He was on city council. He was mayor for 2 terms, and don't know too much else about him. And again, we often say, and we don't mean any disrespect to council members and mayors, but unless we know that they changed the course of Glendale in some way, we're not going to say it's significant just for its association with Peters. But that is of interest, and future research might turn up something else, but it's not in the staff report that we had for review.
Do we know when he was on council?
We do. Well, he was mayor from 61 to 63 and again from 65 to 67. You usually don't become mayor in your first term, so I'm guessing he was on council a little bit before that, and probably between 63 and 64.
Be curious, because I know in 55 they recalled the entire council over the parking meters. He was part of that.
Was it a scandal?
So they thought they
Glendale.
called it was a scandal. Recalled everybody.
Oh, because everyone hated. They weren't. It's
They
not like
hated
they
the
were
parking
taking the cash out.
No.
They could start something.
That'd be a more recent development. So.
It was in 55, so he gets elected after that. Was part of it.
Okay, and the house has had only a few owners subsequently, and that's why it's really in such original condition. Moving on to its condition, there are some alterations. Some of these we think are things that the commission might want to consider placing a condition on the Mills Act if you're inclined to support this nomination. One of those primarily is this gate at the front of the porte cochere, which would be innocuous and probably completely acceptable if it were either set behind these first columns, possibly behind the second, but there's an understandable need for security underneath the porte cochere. But the fact that these posts are kind of in front of the brick, we have the operator attached to it, it would be a much more successful operation and possibly a redesign if this were set back so it wasn't as prominent. So staff is recommending a condition for that. There are a couple of these round brick piers with lights on them. The front landscaping was changed at some point by prior owners. These didn't seem like deal breakers to staff, but again, they're not original features, but I'm not sure what you would do there, and I think these blend away, and the owners may be inclined to just change this in a future re-landscaping, so they can address that when they talk to you. Same thing about this bay window on the kitchen, which is not an original feature, and I think they're interested in making some changes there, which they could discuss. At the back of the house is an area that is an addition, is a change from the original configuration. This was an open patio here that was infilled, and I'm not sure if this roof was the original patio cover or not. It's possible, but I can't say for sure. But you can see that this is the looking from the living room toward this enclosed area. This appears to be the original opening going out to it. There's a chance that these are the original doors or similar to the original doors. So even with an addition like this, I think we could say it's modest, it's in keeping with the house, and I know we've had some issues at City Council lately with additions, so if you're interested in designating this, I think we should spend special attention here and get your thoughts on why, if indeed you think this is appropriate, why it is. or why the house is still eligible even with this feature, just to kind of cover our bases as we go forward. The pool was added in 1953, as was this cabana, I guess. Cabana is interesting because it's kind of sympathetic to the style of the house, but still reads as a later feature. This is a later pergola that was added, and again, I think the owners are planning to change some of these features, so they can discuss that with you. This is an addition at the rear of the garage, completely invisible from the street and from most parts of the property. When we looked at this, it didn't seem to raise any flags about incompatibility. In fact, it meets the Secretary's standards pretty well because it's clearly differentiated, but still compatible because of the wood siding, which is similar to siding you see on the house. And then we have this 3-car garage. We only see 2 doors here. These aluminum doors are not original, and pretty much it's very consistent practice of the commission to recommend that new wood doors be installed as part of a Mills Act contract. So we would recommend that. So we had trouble finding any, the applicant, I think in their application said that this might be significant for its association with Mayor Peters. We didn't have enough information for that, and I can't remember if it suggested significance for the Gene Verge connection, but again, we don't have enough information. But we do think it clearly is qualifying under the architecture criterion 3. It's a really solid example of the Tudor Revival style. It's very intact, and we think it's worthy of your consideration. We did recommend these conditions specifically. Oh, we ended up going to remove the brick posts at the front. I didn't think we were going to go there, so take that into consideration. Replace the garage doors, replace or move the gate at the porte cochere, and then possibly deal with the brick posts and the lights at the front. And that's everything.
I don't have a speaker card, but
Oh, yeah,
for the
sorry.
owners
I
wanting to
didn't
speak.
brief the applicants, so
Okay.
they can fill a card out afterwards. So
Come
either
forward
one or
if you'd
both of you,
like.
if you'd like to.
So fill out the card afterwards?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I didn't.
State your
State
name
your
and talk
name.
into the microphone.
Paul Iannicelli, thank you for your time. I didn't fill out a speaker card because I wasn't sure if you would just, want to ask questions or not. I mean, I don't have a lot to add to what Jay said. We love the house. We love the whole idea of, kind of preserving it. I talked to Commissioner Morgan about this when he came to visit the property, about being sort of a steward of the home. We're just, kind of temporary residents there. And, I look forward to 20 or 30 years from now, whenever it is, passing it along to the next people, and hopefully in even better condition than how we're taking it on. The house is beautiful. It's in the exterior is in great condition. It definitely needs some interior work, so we have a lot of kind of time and energy to put into some of the sort of innards of the house. But that's a fun project, and as I said, hopefully at the end of that project, the house will be something we can kind of pass along for generations to come, and so that's why we applied. And if you have specific questions about the property or the plans or the additions or changes or anything, would be happy to.
Yeah,
answer
could
any
you
of those.
address those? Address your thoughts on the conditions that staff has presented, and also your future plans. I read in your work plan that you've got plans for potential remodel of kitchen, removal of bay window, pool, adding a new pool and recreation room. If you can talk through those.
Sure, so I'll
Thank
take
you.
those in sort of 2 separate
Yeah.
sections. So as to the conditions, that all seems fine. The brick posts in front, we've been working with a landscape architect. First thing he said when we walked up to the property was, "Oh, you have to get rid of those. Those look terrible." And he proposed sort of a
That we
brick.
kind of softened later.
Yeah. He'd proposed kind of a brick patio instead, and sort of consistent lighting. So I think we agree that those probably don't belong. I hadn't given a moment's thought to the garage doors, but we don't have any trouble with that. And the bay window, I guess, that can kind of segue into some of the additional plans that you asked about. The kitchen, obviously there's no pictures of the interior. The interior is really beautiful. I think the commissioners that came to the home agreed. So there's just a lot of really wonderful detail. pretty much throughout the house. The kitchen has been remodeled, not surprisingly, several times throughout the years. And the last time was in the late 1980s. It is desperately in need of a redo and replacement of 30-year-old appliances and stuff. But that ties into the bay window because we've been working with an architect and a designer, and Jay mentioned the Oriel windows, which you couldn't really see because there's a plan for them, but there's a beautiful design. Yeah, unfortunately, you can't really see it at all, but there's leaded glass window, really beautiful design, and we wanted to have new windows custom built to sort of to match that design to replace the bay window there. There's that design's picked up again in the exterior door that goes out to the porte cochere. It's a nice pattern, and it'll look really lovely in the kitchen there. But so it's a basic, the kitchen just needs to be remodeled. The pool areas, you could see from the exterior, the pool's kind of a wreck, or maybe you couldn't really tell. But that pergola is crumbling. All the coping on the pool is kind of falling apart. So the pool needs a significant redo, and we're hoping to actually replace that cabana with a different patio cover that again will be kind of consistent with the home, and a little outdoor kitchen out there. And then we had an idea of, and you can see sort of in the lower picture to the left, that area kind of protruding out from the door. Well, actually, Jay showed a picture of that addition. We thought about, we had a vague idea, perhaps someday, maybe never, of building a pool room there that would be sort of an exterior room that would, be a pool room. I don't know, given everything else that's on the to-do list ahead of it, if that will ever get down to that. But since it was at least a notion, I didn't want to disclose it on the application. It was something we were, thinking about doing. And our architect and our landscape architect are they both love the house and are, want to make sure that whatever is designed is in keeping with the style of the home. So those are the future plans.
Good. Oh, what about the gate? Or is that
Oh
okay
yeah,
as
I'm
the
sorry,
condition?
I forgot to mention the gate. Sure, yeah, we're happy to move that. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I shouldn't mention this, but I think Jay's original comments spoke to the design of the gate as well, not just the placement. And I guess I don't know if that's not sort of Tudor style or not, but I guess we would look for some, if that is part of the condition, and again, I should kick myself raising it, would need some sort of guidance as to, But again, if it's pushed back a little bit, perhaps, then it's just, if it's behind the columns there, it's a little bit less noticeable as to the style. To me, it doesn't look inconsistent, but I'm not a wrought iron guy.
Have you looked at the potential of moving it? I'm only asking that because while it seems so obviously not installed right with all the mechanisms on the front, I'm wondering if there was a reason it was done that way. I remember vaguely, and I should have looked when I was there more closely, but there's other brickwork and walls and stuff behind those columns. And do you think that the gate was put in the front because it can't be installed behind or anywhere further back?
Well,
or do you think that's our space?
So I think it was put at the front of the house for security. It could have. There's room. It's hard to tell because it's dark. There's room to sort of put the gate on the back side of those
front
columns
okay.
there, and I think this gate obviously swings out.
Yeah.
And maybe it was a bit of a tight squeeze. I think it's not a large passageway there.
Someone may park under the porte cochere.
If the gate swings in, or even not parking, I think if the gate swings in, then the post moves in, and you're going to lose, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches of clearance or something. Whereas now the post and the gate, when they open, they don't take up any of that space. So I think there's probably a space issue.
Okay. So I just
so you could drive back to the garage.
It may end up being the gate has to be removed, is where I'm going. And I want to make sure you understand that could be a possibility if it can't be worked out somewhere else, because I have a feeling a lot of times these things are put there not because they wanted to, but because there was no other option when they went to investigate putting it in. Maybe gate technology has changed and it's gotten smaller and it'll be easy. But I want to make sure you guys understand that removal might ultimately be the only course of action.
We're pretty we understand people's security needs, and we're pretty comfortable that there's a solution here that'll work and be better.
Great.
And then with all the stuff you described about potentially doing in the back with all of the pool and everything, if you do get the Mills Act, I just want to make sure you guys understand that all those plans would come before Jay and all that stuff. Sometimes the homeowners are unclear a little bit about the scope of the Historic Preservation Department's purview over the property, but just so you know, it is a 360. Anything you even do in terms of landscaping and things like that would ultimately go through Jay. So just so you understand the ramifications of it all.
And does that include interior remodeling?
Not interior.
Kitchen,
No,
just
so long as it
exterior.
doesn't affect the exterior walls or windows or things like that. If you were doing an interior change and a window had to move, that would, yes. But if you're just changing countertops and things like that, that's not something that.
So, and landscaping exterior that is not connected to the home or the garage
We
is
still
also,
review.
okay.
It would still review, yeah. So any of the coping changes you want to do to the pool, that's all stuff that would go through
Yeah, just
staff.
check with Jay.
Yep.
With whatever you're thinking,
Just
and if you have
presume
current
that
plans.
every square
Yes.
meter of the exterior we're going to look at.
Yeah.
So, and base your decision to proceed accordingly.
That's what I'm getting at.
But you seem like
Yeah.
that's not a hurdle for you.
Are there any other questions for?
No.
The honor? Okay,
No.
thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank you again for your time.
Okay, we'll close the public session.
And Paul, just grab there's a blue sheet over there.
Any comments?
I would be happy to go first after that excruciating hearing. Sorry.
Wasn't as bad as the last one.
No.
I'm a little frustrated, to say the least, but anyways. So I'd like to thank the owners for bringing your property forward and for giving me the tour of the property and for sharing the inside of the home as well. It truly is a spectacular home. Criterion 3 says that the proposed historic resource embodies the distinctive and exemplary characteristics of an architectural style, type, or period. And this house clearly does all of that. And I think you will be very good custodians. I think it's obvious your love for the home, your understanding of the resource that you have, and your plans for how you want to maintain it. I think we can all respect that and know that you'll do good for the house. As for the conditions, I think I would go along with staff regarding the garage doors, the brick posts, converting them to something more elegant, perhaps, as you stated you would look at as well. The gate. And then I think the pool is in the work plans, but we may want to consider adding that as a condition, that the pool will be refinished at some point in time. And keeping, I have no real concerns that you'll go in and put in a big rock fountain or anything like that, but keeping with the style of the house. Thank you for sharing your home, and thank you for bringing it forward.
Cool.
Anyone else?
Well, I concur with my other commissioner. They are beautiful stewards, having been allowed to go through the property and seeing all the work that they've done on the inside. I can't believe that they won't do just as great a job on the outside of the house itself. It's a beautiful house. It sits in just the right spot on the street. It's kind of magnificent is the best way to say it on it. I agree with most of the stuff the staff says on it. The brick posts in front are a little interesting to say. As far as we have to address the enclosed porch, well, I'm already for enclosed porches, so I have no problem with it at all.
Very consistent.
I am all the way down the line. I think it,
Let's put one on the front.
yeah, no, well, yes. Time period. It works well. I was a little concerned when I walked through it, but I think it fits with the property, so I don't think anything had to be done on the porch itself. So I agree with what my commissioner friend has said. So the things that need to be changed, the garage doors, I mean, I didn't bring it up to them at the time, but that was the first thing I said, oh no. But other than that, and the front lights and moving the gate back behind so it's not so obtrusive, though I really did notice he opened the gate as we were walking out and I didn't pay any attention to it at all, so it didn't bother me a lot. But now, having looked at it, I think maybe it would look a little bit better behind the posts. But that's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank you.
I'm not going to repeat everything that's already said. So, right there.
Gotta say something.
Yeah, I can,
Sounds-
okay, so then.
I concur.
Okay, so I concur. I do think, at Jay's suggestion, we should point out that not only was the porch enclosed, I believe there's a permit for the enclosure of the porch. I think that's important to note. And I don't think it detracts much at all from the style of the house or the integrity of the house. So I think it stands just fine. And yes, it's a fabulous house, and we need more English tutors, so yay.
And no one's building them anymore.
No.
Can I make a quick comment? Because I
Sure.
didn't comment on the back porch, but yeah, I think it's, thank you for pointing out that it has a permit. I'm sure it does. But that has become a question at City Council of late. And so I think we probably just need to remind everyone as well that we don't consider our resources museum pieces, and you know, we don't keep properties frozen in time, so we do allow changes. And I agree. I think the porch enclosure at the back is very sensitive to the home.
I'll go out on a limb and say I think it meets the Secretary's standards, so.
Right.
I concur.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing this before us. I unfortunately did not have the chance to come to see your beautiful home. I was out of town all weekend. But from the photos, and I did drive by and take a look from what I could see from the street. So if you saw someone looking at your house, don't be worried. It was probably me. But anyway, yeah, it's beautiful. And it's a great example of Tudor revival. And the property is beautiful from the curb to the back, from what I could see from the photos and online. And I concur with staff regarding the conditions, and I would also like to add the pool condition as well, since that's already identified in the work plan. And I will have to just trust staff's opinion and my colleagues here about the enclosure, because I, again, didn't see it personally, and it's hard to see just from the photos. Or from what it looks like, obviously, it's not the front facade. It's not the key defining feature of this architectural style that was damaged by adding or enclosing a porch. And it's on the very back side, and it looks like it was sympathetically done to the style. So I'll go with that, trusting staff and colleagues on this one, since I wasn't there personally.
And if I could address the pool condition,
Yes.
which a couple of you raised. Generally, we've seen many work plans that come through with, you know, we're going to replace the roof, we're going to do something, and we just know that's going to happen when the owners are able to do it. We typically are only making conditions when we can say the existing pool is a problem and it needs to be replaced. I think the faith that the owners want to do it means that they're going to come to us, as several other Glendale Register owners have done over the last few years, with a new design for a pool that we work with and make sure it meets the standards and keep the character of the house. My recommendation would be to avoid a condition like that, because you're not giving really any guidance. You're just saying, oh, they said they're going to do it, so they should go ahead and do it. It's kind of hard to put a date on that also, because it's a very expensive possible project, and how do we know where they're going to take it? So I think there are just a few variables. So that's my recommendation, but of course you're able to add any condition that you'd like, and the owners have to decide if they're able to adhere to it. So.
I completely concur with your statement.
The only reason is it says
Whoever concurs with me. You guys always concur with each other.
it says plans are available for review. So it seems like the planning has already been done, so it'd be pretty important, I think, that it comes to you, even if this is done, like, in the meantime, prior to going to City Council and potentially getting the nomination, that whatever they might have in the works or be starting at any moment, we don't know, like you say, the schedule, that it meets with your review, or if it needs to come forward because you have concerns, it comes to us. So
that's reasonable, and you can check with the owners when you assign a timeline for the conditions.
Yeah.
I don't remember that the plans were that close, but again, I haven't read
I didn't
this
see
as
them. I'm just,
carefully.
it just says
No, I know,
plans
yeah.
available for review, so I assume they're done.
So
Or-
because these contracts often don't get actually implemented and signed until the end of the year,
Right.
is it presumed that the offer being made to the homeowners is based on the home in the present condition?
Well, generally, unless you put
With
conditions
conditions,
on
yeah.
the Mills Act. So.
No, I understand that. But, like, let's say between now and then they changed a window that wasn't changed before they had applied. And yet, by the time it gets to council, I mean, we don't go back and relook at these homes, right? So it's presumed that nothing has changed between today and that
We are
day.
going to try to start bringing properties to council for Glendale Register designation sooner and also approval of the Mills Act contract, but you're right, the contract itself doesn't get written and dealt with until the end of the year. So
So the chances of a pool being put in by the time this all gets done is, or
if we're
redone,
able to bring
rather.
this in June or July to council, probably not, I would guess. If you want to open the hearing and talk to the owners about their plans and their timeline, that would be good. But it's just, generally you give guidance. You say, install a new garage door that's appropriate to the style of the house. And with the Tudor revival, that's pretty obvious. We can do that. If you're saying replace or redesign the pool in a manner appropriate to Tudor revival house, well, there isn't really any pool that's appropriate that way. So we're going to have to use our judgment and look at it and say, how is this going to affect the overall character? And I know we've had the issue with the house on Royal Boulevard with the pool, in the commission's opinion, detracting considerably from certain historic aspects of the house. Ultimately, I'm fine going either way, and it is, of course, your decision. I just wanted to throw out there that condition is a little different than what we usually do.
I'm sorry, I think I will. I may have said to redo or refinish the pool, but actually there is broken coping around the edge of the pool, which the owners themselves pointed out. And so I think traditionally when there is something that needs to be fixed, we ensure that, that is taken care of. So I don't know if we want to word it that if the pool is redone in a certain time frame, that at a minimum, those repairs have to be made.
I think if the pool were an original architectural feature of the property that was broken, I would say maybe I would agree with that. But I think because the pool really isn't an original feature of the house, the fact that there's a broken brick or two here around the coping doesn't seem necessarily appropriate to put as a condition for the Mills Act contract.
I don't know.
Although the commission has made those, you have carte blanche to put conditions
I think
on
we
contracts,
have in the
and
past.
it's up to the owner.
Doesn't mean it's necessary.
I think, to Commissioner Vartanian's concept, if we know they're going to replace the pool, I'm not sure it's worth putting a condition to fix the copings. We could have a condition to fix the copings within X period of time, unless a proposal for a newly designed pool area is proposed. But then you're also talking about putting a condition to have them redo the pool, so that's a little tricky there.
Can we open the public comment? Can you ask them what their plans are?
On the time frame?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll open the public hearing. If the owner could come forward and just advise a little bit on the time frame of your plans for the pool.
Okay, Paul Iannicelli again. I guess I'd say, it would certainly be our preference not to have the pool be a condition, because I do think of it differently than the other elements which sort of impact the home, whereas, the pool is kind of more of a, it could be a repair issue or a total redesign. We do have plans. As I said before, worked with a landscape architect on the entire sort of landscaping, including the pool. And they're significant. It's, kind of totally redoing the decking, the coping, refinishing the pool, demolishing that pergola, the kind of rotting pergola, and building a new patio cover there. So we've been soliciting bids for this. It's going to be quite an expensive project. We hope to, if we can kind of come to terms with somebody, we hope to undertake it this year.
Okay, so
but it's, the scope of that could change depending on the cost also.
would you feel, sorry, can I ask a question? Would you feel comfortable waiting to implement those plans until after all of this was done, so that those plans could then be reviewed by staff before you implemented them?
They will be reviewed by staff regardless.
You haven't
But if
seen
he
them
implements
today.
them,
No, I haven't
if he implements them in the next 3 months or in 5 months, they won't necessarily be reviewed by staff.
Well, they should be reviewed by staff, because if they didn't maintain the character of the house, we would change our staff opinion before going to council.
So that was the question I had before. Do we go back and re-inspect these properties? How do we know if that's been done or not?
Well, once it's designated, owners are obligated to share this with us.
Before it's designated.
No, I understand. For
Okay.
example, you put a condition for replacing garage doors on the not the Jess Willard, the Orrin Whitney house, the organist, and the owner just jumped on that and did that immediately after you did it, well before he even signed his contract, because he was so excited to do it. He got our approval, we worked together on the design, and I think we all agree it came out really nicely. So in general, we would expect that the owner during this process would be, you know, you're bound. This is something that's a pending decision. It's already been heard by Historic Preservation Commission, so you have ongoing design review authority, at least in an advisory mode at this point, until the designation's final. So, you know, it's an act of faith. We have to presume that the owners aren't going to replace the pool without talking to us.
Okay. So I guess just so you understand, it sounds like if you decide you want to go forward with this pool prior to the end of the year when this contract is signed, please understand that it would be expected that you would go through staff to review those plans. They sound like they're done, which is great. If staff hasn't seen them, it's important that they do and have their opportunity to
So two slightly different things, no
Okay.
problem with that.
Okay.
And they are done, although we've been tweaking them a little bit, but you know, we have the full blueprints. And that's fine, and we're happy to work with, you know, Jay's staff on that or anything else that we're doing on the exterior. That's still a little bit different than the condition being that you must do this.
Or that it must be done.
That it must
be
be
completed.
done. That it must be done.
I agree.
So,
Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
thank you.
So Jay, could you make your recommendation based on knowing there are plans that are completed and you have not seen yet, what we should do in this case as far as approving with a condition, or just that staff reviews and approves plans that have already been drafted?
Which really isn't, we could make that a condition, I guess, but there's no time, we don't know the timeline, and conditions are meaningless without a timeline. And we know that long after the timeline for conditions expires, we're going to be working with owners, reviewing forever what happens to the property. So I'm very comfortable just moving forward, letting them figure out how much it's going to cost and when they're going to be able to do it. If it's sooner than later, I think we'll have an agreement based on what we've talked about tonight to allow me to review those. Once the designation is final and the Mills Act contract's in place, they're obligated to come forward, and there would be penalties if they did something that was destructive to the character of the property. So, yeah, I guess for me, the hard part of this is the timeline, and it seems a little arbitrary when we don't even know what we're talking about and when they plan to do it. And we've talked in the past about ongoing conditions, and we've always kind of walked that back because there has to be a time for us to.
But maybe there's a time frame for you to review the plans so that we know that you're going to see them in the next month or two, prior to, you know, if the Mills Act contract's not going to be signed until December, right? Technically, they could implement this whole thing without your purview, and then still get the Mills Act contract. So what I'm saying is, can at least there be a condition where they're working with you in the next, you know, month or since the plans are done, so you can weigh in on that.
Yeah,
and we
you
won't
could-
put a condition on when the pool has to be done, but just that obviously the plans for the back end would be.
I don't see any problem with that, and you could put the condition, you know, since they're still tweaking them, you know, maybe give them 3 months, 6 months, whatever you think is appropriate. And that would just be for plan review with knowledge that they may or may not move forward with the project. So, or if they tweak the project in the future, they would need to come back.
Come back, yeah.
But at that point, it would be designated.
Right, by then at
theoretically,
least it would be covered under
yeah.
designation in the contract. Because this is a little different. We haven't typically had someone come to us with lots of plans already proposed, but we haven't seen them, yet we're giving them a designation on something that's, you know, imminently changing. So I think I'd feel more comfortable with putting at least a condition that you would see those in the next, 3 months. It would be fine, I think, for me.
Okay, how about if, what if the homeowner decides to just not even deal with the pool this year?
Well, that's what
So
Lorna was
that's-
saying, to
that's- so
at least.
We'll have reviewed the drawings, and if they come back.
So they
in
have to
2
bring
years-
them, so the condition is that they have to bring them to you regardless of whether or not they drive home tonight and say, you know what, we don't want to think about the pool for 2 years. They still have to bring them
Yeah,
the plans in the next 3
within
months.
whatever
or
time period, 3 months or more, they would bring the drawings in, I would review them, I would determine whether or not it's compatible with the house. If I find it's not, we'll kind of revise the plans. If I find that it is, that's that. I won't be stamping anything, I won't be approving anything, there's no permit being issued. 10 years later, they come back and say, we want to install our pool, whether it's me or someone else, someone will look at that and say, okay, this was approved, these drawings were approved on such and such a date, and we'd look at the new drawings and say, are they the same or very similar? And if they are, move forward, it's already been approved, or conceptually approved. That's why it's a little weird for me doing a conceptual approval at an early point. But I don't see any harm in it. I don't think it's going to be a problem.
I think I'm comfortable just I think the owners understand that if they want to make any changes, they need to go through you. So I don't know that we need to put a condition on bringing plans forward.
No. How about if they decide, the condition could simply be if they decide that they're going to do the pool work before their Mills Act contract is signed, then they have to bring the plans. Because once it's signed, they will have to bring the plans. So we don't really need to make a condition about it after that point. And I just think if they decide they don't want to deal with that, the pool this year, and yet we're making them bring the plans to Jay, Jay's got to review them and all of this for something that may not happen for 5 years, that just doesn't seem, Jay's got plenty of other things to do, I think, as do the property owners. So I think a simple condition of, first of all, I don't think any condition is necessary, but if we have to address the pool, I think a simple condition along the lines of, if the property owners decide to actually do work on the pool before their Mills Act contract is signed, that they will go through historic preservation and staff to do that. If they don't decide to do the pool, then that condition lapses when their contract is signed, and we don't have to think about it anymore. It's just an automatic condition at that point. So, with that, I'd like to make a motion.
Does that address your concern about condition currently?
I think that's fine. If we didn't know they had plans to do their pool, we wouldn't be putting any condition on the plans. Are we overthinking this?
Yes. Very much so. So can I make a motion?
You may.
You may.
Thank you. I move that the Historic Preservation Commission recommend to the City Council that the property at 1545 Virginia Avenue, to be called the Grether House, after its initial occupant, be designated as a historic resource in the Glendale Register of Historic Resources, and that the City Council authorize the City Manager to enter into a Mills Act contract with the property owners for property tax savings. SAC recommends that conditions be added to the contract, calling for the appropriate replacement of the garage doors, removal or relocation of the gate at the porte cochere, and the removal of the light posts. Also, if the property owners decide to renovate their pool prior to the implementation of their Mills Act contract, that they will have their plans reviewed by Historic Preservation.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Roll call, please.
Did you get it?
Commissioner Crignati,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Doom,
Yes.
Commissioner Bartanian,
Yes.
Commissioner Shire.
Yes.
5-0 with 4 conditions.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me. Timeline. This is something that I
Oh,
often forget.
yes, timeline.
And if you all can help, we just need to put the time on these.
6 months.
No, for the gate,
No.
garage doors,
Oh.
and the.
I think it would be reasonable to give 2 years,
Yeah, the custom.
knowing that they're not going to get the Mills Act contract and all that till the end of this year, for gate, garage doors, lamp posts. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got some work to do.
So would that be from
you agree?
the?
Yeah.
I think it's 2 years
Yeah,
from the
2
contract.
years is.
Generally, we do it from the date of the contract.
2 years from the contract.
Which makes life easier, so December 2020.
Thanks for reminding us on that.
Okay, next is 8A, which is Planning Division updates. And the first update is update on the accessory dwelling unit ordinance with regard to historic districts.
Wow, I forgot I put that on. Are you sure?
Do you want to
You
move
can table it. Let's table it.
No, we.
Move it to next week? Next month?
No, it's fine. Council has approved the new accessory dwelling unit ordinance. There was great public input, so big meetings. With regard to historic resources, we are allowing accessory dwelling units at all properties, whether it's Glendale Register or Historic District, contributor or non-contributor. In both cases, an accessory dwelling, well, the exception is Mills Act properties. We haven't gotten a final read from the state, but I believe we do have, because one of the issues with ADUs is we have extremely limited design review authority as these move forward. I believe with Mills Act contracts, we will have full design review authority because the contract supersedes the state law. But the State Historic Preservation Office was a little non-committal when I talked to them about that. But it was their determination for solar installations, so I think it'll be the same here. So that's one caveat for Mills Act properties. For any other properties, the ADU cannot be visible from the street. And what we have kind of tweaked in terms of our interpretation is that many people are coming forward with garage conversions for their ADUs, and the sense was that's okay. Like technically, a garage is visible from the street, but we're okay if the garage gets converted as long as from the street we don't see a window, a new door, anything. So in the base conception of this, if a garage has, say, its original garage doors that are appropriate to the house, we're going to either have the owner convert those doors into a wall, because no one wants a leaky, air-riddled garage door, convert those doors into a wall, or build a new wall that completely replicates the appearance of the garage door in all of its details, including its recess within the opening and all of that. If the house, say, has a replacement garage door, which is more likely, what we'll do is look for a design that we think, just as we would do with the Mills Act condition, find a garage door that is appropriate to the style of the house and make the wall that style. If there's no existing person door on the front, that's going to have to go on the side or the back. If it's appropriate for that garage door to have some glazing across the top, as is common for some garage doors, that's a possibility, but we'll do that case by case. So that's kind of the big shift, and I believe that was alluded to in the discussion at council. But we just recognized that was like one issue where it's like, well, technically it's visible, but if we make it look like the garage, then what are we losing if we're allowing those conversions?
The only
and no second story. You can't in a non-historic setting. You can put a second story over a garage if it's completely supported by the garage structure and meets some setback requirements. In a historic area or historic property, we wouldn't allow any second story addition.
Now, does the code still stand, though, that if you had a single-story home, you could not add a second-story garage?
You could in a non-historic setting.
Even in current code, taking away the ADU?
Oh, current code, no. Current code, the
Right.
height limit for accessory structures is 15 feet, so the ADU trumps code for
That's
that.
what I'm asking.
Yeah.
trumps a lot of code in a lot of different ways.
Right. So, do you have any questions?
No? Any questions?
At 8:40.
Okay, with that, we'll adjourn.